It all begins with a beautiful sunny day illuminating the grand hall through the enormous curtains and windows. Then we see a gigantic banquet set on the table to celebrate a very special occasion. Young Master Isaac sits at the table while the maids call him a genius for entering the Royal Academy at 10 years of age. Then a nanny brings a plate full of seafood, saying she prepared the boy's favorite foods to celebrate. And with much affection, the boy gives a small and sweet smile, his cheeks blushing from so much happiness. With that, the little protagonist thanks his nanny for all the effort she put into preparing that wonderful meal. At that moment, a guard approaches, handing him a gift and leaving the young man surprised as he says he didn't need that. But the young man insists on giving the present since his son survived an illness thanks to the medicine the noble brought. Thus, he states that the boy's life was worth much more and accepts the beautiful red box with plenty of gratitude. Suddenly, hurried footsteps go through the hall and someone approaches quickly, calling for his beloved older brother. This is Jonas, who appears holding a lute and promises to play a beautiful song to celebrate his relative's achievement. The security guard soon praises the boy's skills with the instrument, commenting that even the court musicians consider him a prodigy. Excited by the information, the little blonde boy gives a huge smile and asks the youngest to start playing right away. The little musician nods in agreement and happily prepares to begin his highly acclaimed musical performance. Then the little boy closes his eyes and begins to strum the strings of the instrument with great skill and intense concentration. However, the sweet memory is interrupted by desperate screams and a dark vision of hands playing very roughly. With that, the protagonist, now much older, suddenly wakes up in his bed screaming in terror and breaking into a cold sweat. Sitting in the darkness of his room, he breathes heavily, trying to calm down upon realizing that it was all just a mere dream. Still very tense, Isaac gives a sad smile and considers himself a great fool for reminiscing about that distant past. Looking at the snow-covered castle during the night, the young man laments the fact that he can never return to those happy days. Then calm footsteps echo up the dark stone staircase of the castle. Next, a young man approaches an old wooden door at the end of the hallway. As soon as the door opens, the servant enters holding a tray of food and greets young Master Isaac. But at that moment, the employee is surprised to notice something strange in the room. The servant named Lucas immediately asks if his master had a nightmare upon seeing him sitting on the bed looking so pale. With that, the blonde boy touches his face and mentions having dreamed about something that happened about 20 years ago. Then, the young man places the meal on the table, advising the noble to forget the past and enjoy the fresh cheese. The tray was full of a beautiful stew and warm breads to satisfy the protagonist's hunger in the early hours of the morning. Then Lucas warns that after he finishes eating, they will make up for the sword training from the previous day. Isaac just listens while recalling that a long time ago he caught a severe flu before entering the academy. He was sick for 3 entire months, and his father ended up calling a great mage to evaluate the situation. At that moment, the scholar warns the Lord that the boy had a very special physical constitution. The mage explains that every living being has a natural vessel where magical energy circulates at an ideal speed. But unfortunately, the boy's mana circulation was too violent and incredibly faster than normal. And at that speed, his magical structure would soon break, causing a terrible disaster. It was then that the immense amount of mana exploded from his body, as if a strong dam had broken. The energy collapsed with the external magic, generating a brutal explosion while the young man screamed in despair. In that instant, the shockwave threw the servants and objects into the air, severely hurting many people in that place. The tragic magical incident ended up causing massive destruction across the hall and bringing immense sadness to everyone. But the worst part of all was seeing his beloved little brother hurt on the floor next to the beautiful destroyed musical instrument. Then we see the boy's father looking very shaken upon hearing his own son's request to be locked away in an isolated place. The young man asks for this in tears and laments his sad condition that only brings misfortune to his family. Tears stream down his face as he begs to be taken to a very distant place where no one can reach him. So the boy was isolated in the dark, only studying to ensure that no one else would end up hurt because of him. Remembering this, the noble bites into a piece of bread and reflects that he must have been about 15 years old when all that happened. But at that moment, a very strong and sudden cough breaks the silence of the dark room. The protagonist notices that his faithful lackey is feeling unwell near the door and calls his name with a lot of concern. The situation seems quite serious since the employee dirtied his own hand while coughing nonstop. Noticing the symptoms, the master immediately deduces that his ally is suffering from mana poisoning due to the long time they've spent together. With that, the lackey grips the edge of the door, trying to stay on his feet even while feeling immense pain throughout his body. The boy quickly holds his friend and warns that he needs to rest for at least 1 entire month to try to heal. Wiping his face, the servant smiles and jokes, asking who would take care of a friendless boy like him if he wasn't there. Sensing the tone of irony, Isaac threatens to dismiss the employee for the insult, but the young man just asks him not to worry. Thus, the dark-haired young man states that he survived dozens of explosions without losing even a single strand of hair, and he adds saying that the noble would never find anyone as good as him since one small mistake could cost everything. Even though he is worried, the boy tells his friend to get out of there so he can meditate in peace and without any kind of distraction. Smiling gently, the caretaker agrees to the request, saying goodbye to his dear lord with much consideration. Then the heavy wooden door closes, leaving the hare completely alone in that isolated and sad environment. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by a familiar voice congratulating him with great enthusiasm. With that, he opens his eyes in bewilderment, realizing that he has traveled back in time right to the day of that grand banquet from the beginning of the story. Then the boy has a terrible vision of the dining hall covered by a dark aura and sinister stains spread across the table. He is then faced with a shocking scene upon seeing his faithful lackey lying on the floor having passed on. With this, the noble's mind plays a trick on him, creating the illusion that his caretaker was arriving to serve dinner. But the employee's face appears with a very scary look in his thoughts, saying that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. At that moment, the hero suddenly wakes up panting and totally disturbed because of this agonizing nightmare. Sweating cold, Isaac keeps his eyes open, trying to process all those heavy emotions and the anguish in his chest. All of this was because, unfortunately, his great friend had passed away after spending a long time suffering from that severe illness. And after leaving that room feeling very sick, the employee never returned to visit the young man for one entire year. Then the protagonist heard the tragic news from his father and decided to lock his door forever, isolating himself from the world. With that, he began to live in the dark, only receiving some hard bread through the small hole in his bedroom door. Lying in his bed, the young man reflects on his mistakes, thinking he should have kept his distance from other people. The young man laments his own kindness and believes he should have been much colder to those around him, because he feels that if he had pushed everyone away, his beloved family and his companion would still be living happily. As the years slowly passed by, the pile of stale bread only grew in that dark corner of the room. But an aged hand appears grabbing the food, showing that even after so much time isolated, the hero was still hanging on. Now looking very tired, the survivor chews the dry food, deciding that he needs to focus only on his future. The solitary time was cruel, marking the bedroom wall and turning the young man into a man with the features of an elderly person. During those 3 decades in isolation, Isaac dedicated his life to the study of magic until there were no more books left to read. Then the wise man closed his eyes to meditate, realizing that the only thing left was his own intuition and inspiration. At that moment, a mysterious voice echoes in the former master's mind, calling out to the one who will begin a great journey. Several years have passed since then, and finally the elderly wise man found a huge clue to overcome his sad condition. With that, he scrapes the mold off his stale bread, while finding it strange that no one from the family had sent the materials. Analyzing the glowing magic stone on his table, the scholar wonders if something serious happened to his beloved relatives. At that moment, the Lord's gaze shows a lot of concern upon noticing that a lot of time had passed inside that place. Observing the dozens of marks made on the stone wall, the solitary hare calculates that he is now 71 years old, but suddenly heavy footsteps break the long silence of the castle, rapidly approaching the entrance of his dark room. Thus, the face of a mysterious man with a large mustache reflects in the dim light of the hallway, bringing a very tense atmosphere. Standing in front of the heavy wooden prison door, the unexpected visitor calls out to his dear brother in a very soft manner. Revealing his true identity, Jonas tries to look through the bars, asking if his old relative was sleeping. Hearing the voice of his youngest brother after so much time isolated, the older man widens his eyes, completely in shock from the surprise. Trembling a lot, the noble hurriedly walks to the exit, questioning the real reason the boy had come there that day. The visitor remains in the dark hallway, staring at the heavy door that had separated them during all those long decades. With a very sad and pleading expression, Isaac asks for permission so that his beloved family member can enter his room. However, the youngest brother squeezes his hand tightly and denies the request, telling the old man to converse only through the small security hole. With that, the two sit on the floor leaning against the iron wall while Jonas warns that he has a very long story to tell him. And with a heavy sigh, the man on the outside reveals that that exact day marked the sad anniversary of their father's passing. Shock dominates the prisoner's wrinkled face upon receiving this terrible news, and he immediately questions how the patriarch ended up passing away. Then his little brother makes it clear that the answer was very complex and asks if the mage was willing to listen to it all. Giving a dark smile, the warrior decides to begin his long explanation, recounting the bizarre events from 30 years ago. He says that in the beginning, there was a terrible war of succession for the throne occurring between the first and the second royal prince. Listening to all of that, the wise old man gets a sad expression, remembering the painful memories of his beloved family. At that point, the prisoner's gaze shows immense guilt for having stayed away from the people he loved most for so long. Then a sweet memory pops into his mind, showing the two very young brothers sitting together in a very happy past. But trying to break the heavy mood, the Lord praises the captivating way the youngest brother told that whole long tragic story. The man laughs in the dark hallway and jokes, saying he should have spent his life traveling the world as a great poet. At that moment, the mage sadly remembers that it would be quite difficult since the young man lost the movement in one of his hands. With that, a heavy silence dominates the environment until the visitor lowers his head and asks for forgiveness for everything that had happened. The warrior squeezes his own hands with a lot of force, trying to hold back the immense anguish stored inside his chest. Gathering his courage, the family member takes a deep breath to reveal one last very important secret kept for all these years. He then confesses that both his parents and the brother himself felt immense resentment toward the noble isolated in that dungeon. Hearing this harsh truth, the older man's lips begin to tremble as he waits for the rest of that surprising declaration. However, the soldier quickly finishes the sentence, stating that deep down they all really miss the dear master locked up in there. And to the old man's surprise, his relative emotionally confesses that the entire family always loved him in a very true way. Then the young man calls up a lot due to his severe injuries, revealing his strong desire to look at his older brother's face one last time. The scholar falls into despair upon hearing that and questions the real reasons why this would be the last conversation between them. Quickly, the panic mage stands up, trying to figure out if his youngest brother had suffered severe injuries during the terrible war. Unfortunately, the voice on the outside begins to fail, leaving the prisoner with wide eyes in a pure state of panic. Noticing the red liquid seeping under the crack, the Lord deeply regrets not having opened the gate sooner. Then, with a very sudden movement, the elderly man finally opens the heavy wooden lock, revealing the dark scene. But what he finds is a devastating sight, showing his beloved Jonas fallen, having passed away with a severe sword wound. Observing the severe injury, the elderly man laments how his brother managed to endure talking for so long while hurt like that. With that, the wise man gently holds his family member's form, saying that he cannot simply stay lying there forever. Then the protagonist gathers all his strength to lift his youngest brother, and finally take him out of that cold prison. Walking slowly, the survivor's heavy footsteps echo up the dark steps of the long and scary stone corridor. Embracing his lifeless relative, the man climbs the stairs of the place, carrying the weight of endless sadness inside his chest. Thick tears stream down his wrinkled face while the Lord wonders why everything had to end so badly. Feeling the light weight in his arms, the master wonders how much that brave warrior had to go hungry while far from home. Then, after a long climb, the huge double doors finally open, revealing a strong bright light coming from the outside. As soon as the light hits his tired face, the noble lets out a heavy sigh as he feels the strong, cold breeze of the external environment. However, the sight he encounters is one of pure destruction, with the grand royal palace reduced to just massive rubble and dust. Walking through the ruins, the elderly man finds the fallen form of a huge scary monster defeated during that terrible battle. Reaching out his tired hand, the mage feels the small snowflakes falling gently, realizing the arrival of a long winter. Knowing that the ground is frozen, he tells his youngest brother that they will need to wait until spring to give him a very proper burial. Looking at the dry trees, the solitary hare promises that right after laying his family member to rest, he will also be able to find peace. Time fast forwards rapidly, melting the ice and bringing life back with beautiful butterflies flying through the tree branches. At that moment, a beautiful white insect lands on the old sword that served as a humble headstone to honor the warriors. Walking through the field, the older man approaches the resting places and observes a huge empty hole dug deeply into the damp earth. With that, he firmly grips the glowing magic stone in his hands, totally determined to change that very dark fate. Then the protagonist releases the precious crystal, letting the object fall toward the ground to initiate his temporal spell. Using his immense power, the wise old man finally prepares to return to the past and try to save everyone he loved. The elderly mage raises his hand, creating a powerful magic flame through that small glowing stone. With that, the fire illuminates the place, proving that the great temporal spell was finally ready to be used. Looking up at the bright sky, the Lord asks mentally if his beloved brother was watching that great achievement. He squeezes the jewel, relieved to have overcome his physical flaw, and feels that now he can finally rest in peace. Then the frail and tired body of the older man ends up giving out, and he falls face down on the ground near his family's resting place. Totally drained of energy, the survivor realizes that his long and lonely journey was coming to an end. Lying on the grass during the rain, the old man wonders if he could be forgiven if he had acted much faster. At that point, he remembers the destruction of the castle and regrets having wasted so much precious time drowning in his despair. With deep sorrow, the solitary hare questions whether things would be different if he had been stronger. But soon his vision begins to blur while the elderly man's body rests peacefully on that green field. Thus, a mysterious light envelops the Lord, and he closes his eyes, accepting his fate with complete tranquility. Suddenly, a very familiar voice echoes in the protagonist's mind, asking if he had had a bad nightmare. Isaac wakes up startled in his bed, gasping for air with a lot of desperation, while trying to understand what happened. At that moment, the young man notices the presence of his faithful lackey, who warns him about his pale face and cold sweat. Lucas slowly approaches with a worried expression, asking if his beloved master slept poorly that night. Still in shock, the blonde boy wonders if he is dreaming or if his entire life flashed before his eyes. Seeing the noble's silence, the employee takes another step forward, calling out to the boy with a lot of confusion. Then the boy ignores the lackey and runs to the window, hearing someone telling his youngest brother to come down from a place. Tears stream down his face upon hearing the sweet voice of his relative being stubborn and saying he was perfectly fine. And looking through the leaves of the tree, the young man finally spots little Jonas smiling and bursting with health. Seeing the scene through the window, Isaac notices his brother Jonas playing happily on the branches of a large tree. Completely in shock, the boy calls out to the youngest brother, unable to believe that his relative was actually still around. The little boy smiles and raises his arms, celebrating, while the nanny begs him to come down from there quickly. Admiring that beautiful smile, the noble presses his hand against the glass, feeling an enormous emotion invade his chest. With this, the little blonde boy finally understands that all of it was very real, and not just a simple dream in his head. Looking down at his own hands, the young man concludes that he miraculously managed to return straight to the past. At that moment, footsteps approach where he was, and someone calls him young master with a lot of confusion. But the young man remains focused on the outside, listening to the maid scolding him about the danger of climbing the tree. Thinking the person was talking to him, the hare replies aggressively, saying he was fine. However, upon turning around, the boy gets a huge scare when he sees that the visitor was his faithful lackey Hans. At that point, the boy's mind travels back to the day his magic went out of control, destroying several vases in the castle. On that occasion, the maids were cleaning everything up, complaining about the constant fear of a new explosion happening. The loyal guard ended up listening to the entire conversation hidden in the hallway, noticing the extreme irritation of the employees. Furious at the insults, the warrior warns that he would teach those gossiping women a major lesson. But the protagonist quickly grabs his friend's clothing, stopping him from causing any trouble in the palace. With a very sad look, the boy confesses that those frightened women weren't wrong to complain like that. Then the master asks the lackey to stop visiting him, since he was using crutches after getting hurt that day. Hearing this, Hans gets a hurt expression, noticing the massive guilt the boy carried in his chest. Without hesitation, the employee kneels in front of the noble, completely refusing to abandon his post as caretaker. And with great affection, he assures that he would always protect the boy because he was just going through a difficult phase. Isaac remembers the sweet words of his faithful lackey saying that everything would be fine right after that bad phase passed. Then Hans showed a beautiful, bright smile while commenting that hardships were part of everyone's life. But the boy's mind soon drifts to the sad day when one of his dangerous explosions caused the tragic loss of his good friend. Crying deeply, the Lord blames himself for this immense tragedy, feeling that he was the one responsible for those terrible events. Then the protagonist focuses on the sight of his youngest brother playing outside to try and decide what he should do now. With great determination, the young man leans against the glass of the huge window and calls out to the lackey in a very serious tone. The caretaker turns around politely with a gentle smile on his face, demonstrating all his respect for the young lord. At that moment, the boy surprises his ally, ordering very harshly that he leave the room immediately. And to push the man away, the hare yells furiously, telling the servant to disappear from his sight as fast as possible. Hearing those screams, the good lackey widens his eyes, completely in shock at his lord's attitude. With that, the warrior lowers his head with a very hurt look and simply agrees with his master's order. Isaac clenches his fists, believing that this harsh attitude was the best thing to do to avoid putting anyone in danger. Leaning on his crutches, the injured employee turns around, walking slowly toward the exit of that room. But before leaving, he turns his face, asking the little noble not to try to carry all that burden alone. Standing in front of the massive illuminated door, the young man advises the boy to trust them more during difficult times. The hare looks at his own hand, confused because he has no memories of hearing this advice in his previous lonely life. Trying to confirm if he was experiencing a delusion or pure reality, the protagonist gives himself a hard slap on the face. With that, he rubs his red cheek, feeling a lot of pain and finally believing that the return in time was very real. But a huge doubt pops into his mind, making him wonder how his old body ended up passing away in the future. Still deep in thought, the boy goes back to admiring the scenery, feeling that he's earned an incredible chance to change his history. Then the boy realizes that it doesn't matter if all of this is just a dream or pure reality. Observing the landscape, he decides he will do everything to stop his mana from exploding again. The protagonist remembers an ancient legendary mage who suffered from this exact same physical condition, and during his years in prison, the Lord read about this ancestor of his in his own family's records. With that, after years of intense study, the wise man discovered a way to cure this magical anomaly. Then the noble stares fixedly at a beautiful blue stone that would be the key to his salvation. That small object featured hand-carved engravings capable of turning anything into a runestone. Thus, by purposely damaging the energy pathways of the jewel, a new rut ended up being created. And in this incredibly ingenious way, all the shock caused by the violent energy could be dispersed. The young man reflects that to avoid the explosion, his body needed to withstand that strong circulation. But unfortunately, the magic flowed in such an intense and fast way that his physique couldn't handle it. Any regular person would perish immediately, but the young man's body healed itself as if it were nothing. Therefore, the energy built up and caused dozens of consecutive disasters in an uncontrolled manner. Isaac stares at the jewel, remembering that he almost lost his life to succeed and that the chance of failing was high. Taking a deep breath, the boy grips the stone firmly, hoping that his invention works now. At that moment, a small magic flame forms in his hand, serving as huge proof of his triumph. However, suddenly the spell slips out of control, creating a gigantic pillar of fire in the middle of the room. The hero widens his eyes, completely terrified by that absurd force coming out of his hands. Meanwhile, in the backyard, the youngest brother calls out to his relative, wanting to play together with his action figures, and in that exact instant a bright flash illuminates the castle, leaving the boy in a total state of panic. Utterly bewildered, the Lord steps back as he feels the absurd force of that magic spell lighting up his entire vision. The young man's eyes go wide as he hears the sound of strong, pure mana cracking the air around him. Then, a massive circle of energy shatters and the magic spreads, glowing intensely on the hare's chest. Amazed by the excellent result, the protagonist observes the beautiful magic glow reflecting on his own face. Then he grips his small jewel, feeling a large amount of power running directly through his hands. Thus, strong flames start to sprout from the stone, proving that his clever theory finally worked out. At that moment, an immense blast of fire shoots upward, spinning rapidly around the large bedroom. Celebrating the great achievement, the boy notices that the energy pathways in the relic had increased to 3. Quite surprised, the little scholar notes that he can now use 3 types of magic at the same time. But soon the noble clenches his fist tightly and decides to focus completely on his main life goal. Looking at the window, the young man remembers that his true goal is to prevent the tragic explosions from occurring. With this, the wise man concludes with strong conviction that just having those 3 magic pathways wouldn't be enough. He understands that he will need to use a lot of magic frequently to relieve as much of the heavy burden on his own body as possible. Thus, the young man grabs the blue jewel, figure he won't be able to keep anyone around during this long training. Then night falls, revealing the beautiful and cold sight of the enormous castle illuminated only by the bright moon. Suddenly, the door opens and the loyal Hans appears smiling, holding a tasty meal for his beloved master. The boy ignores the nice plate of wheat bread, asking again for the annoying lackey to disappear from there quickly. But the stubborn employee brings a piece of the food closer, warning with a lot of affection that he would only leave if he ate it all. Isaac is totally in disbelief at his ally's stubbornness, finding that sweet look in his direction quite strange. Sighing deeply, the boy asks his real age, hearing the caretaker confirm that he is 12 years old. Reflecting on his current situation, the young man concludes that it is very normal to act like a spoiled child at this tender age. But his hand's movement stops in midair as he observes that nice and simple piece of baked food. The boy soon realizes that his dear nanny had made the food, feeling an enormous nostalgia for that old flavor. With that, the boy goes back to chewing his dinner calmly while the friendly caretaker watches him with a beautiful smile on his face. Then the master mentions not having seen the woman all day, and the lackey replies that her son caught a bad illness. Hearing the sad information, the noble stops eating his stew, getting an expression of sheer surprise. At that moment, the young man drops his silver spoon on the table and deduces that the employee must have returned to her home. The heir reflects that in any other noble household, a maid could never abandon her post for a reason like that. This just proved how well his beloved family treated the employees, maintaining an environment filled with a lot of kindness. With that, strong flames crackle in the fireplace of the grand bedroom, while silence takes over that nighttime setting. Deeply immersed in his own thoughts, the silver-haired boy starts trying to recall the events of the past. The protagonist taps his fingers very restlessly on the table, feeling that something terrible was about to happen again. Then the lord turns to the side, questioning if that little boy was the only one suffering from that tragic condition. The loyal lackey lowers his eyes, slightly saddened, trying to pick the best words to tell the whole truth. Then he warns that all the poor kids in the village caught the same illness, leaving his little lord very shocked. Admiring the beautiful moon through the window, the old wise man in a child's body finally manages to remember that time perfectly. That dark moment was marked as the great disaster of the Black Goose Village, where the nanny lost her beloved son. That cruel tragedy destroyed the heart of that sweet woman, and made her live with major trauma until her final day. But the boy hurts upon remembering that the employee ended up losing her life in the tragic magic explosion to protect the noble himself. Totally determined to stop another disaster, the heir rests his face on his hand, trying to recall the cause of the entire infection. Then the boy shifts his posture, staring at the stew while calling his loyal employee with a very firm voice. The caretaker gets a bit confused by his master's serious tone, patiently waiting for the orders from that little lord. With that, the noble questions his ally about what types of monsters were recently defeated in the region of that village. Hearing the young man's doubt, the man repeats the question thoughtfully, trying to search for that information in his memory. Scratching his face, the employee reveals that mages from a magic tower bought the fallen creature to use in their research. Then the guard remembers seeing a huge monster with ice legs being transported in a simple wooden wagon. The lackey describes that the taken-down beast had the bizarre appearance of a giant spider covered in beautiful silver fur. At that moment, the heir solves the riddle, remembering an old magic book that detailed the famous winter spider. Sitting on the bed, the scholar recalls that these beasts are very weak, but can multiply incredibly fast. However, the light-haired young man understands that the true danger of this terrible species lies in its accumulated energy. Thus, he realizes that ordinary people exposed to this brutal magic end up suffering a painful suffocation until they fade away. Looking up at the night sky again through the massive castle window, the boy processes all that new information. And far from there, we see a small, defenseless deer walking peacefully through a dense, snow-filled forest. Suddenly, the small animal perks up its ears, totally startled upon hearing a very strange sound coming from the large bushes. Then a large fireball tears through the darkness of the woods, lighting up the entire area and flying swiftly toward the animal. With a quick leap, the agile deer manages to dodge that strong magic attack, escaping the danger with a lot of luck. Stepping out from the leaves, the little mage appears holding flames in his hands and regrets missing his first spell. The boy was wearing a heavy winter coat and carrying tools, confessing he had mistaken the animal for a strong wolf. Thus, the young adventurer adjusts his large leather backpack on his back and decides to move forward through the dense forest. Then he walks past an old wooden sign indicating that this was the entrance to the tragic Black Goose Village. The young man walks to an illuminated spot in the forest and starts picking some herbs to use in his newest plan. The protagonist deduces that the village children ended up poisoned by the mana from those winter beasts. Then Isaac tosses all those medicinal plants into his bag to prepare a good remedy for everyone. He laments the fact that the people from that era understood nothing about magic and mistook the case for pneumonia. At that moment, the young lord observes his full bag, hoping the large amount of herbs will be enough. With this, the heir plans to feed the sick with this powerful medicine to try to relieve the severe symptoms. But the mage knows the effect will be temporary, and to stop the worst, he will need to hunt down all the spiders by himself. The boy even considers asking his parents for help, but his brave father was guarding the kingdom's dangerous borders. And to make the situation worse, his dear mother was traveling across the continent desperately searching for a cure for the boy. Knowing all this, the noble feels that if he just folds his arms, his sweet nanny's son will end up passing away soon. So after a long walk, the hare finally arrives at the village covered by dense darkness and illuminated by the moon. Approaching a humble wooden house, the wise boy notices that the atmosphere in that small village was very quiet. Inside the residence, we see the poor nanny wearing a cloth over her face while suffering next to her beloved son's bed. Suddenly, knocks on the door break the sad silence of the place, leaving the woman startled, not knowing who could be there. Then the sweet employee opens the door with a lot of fear and asks who is visiting the house on such a cold night. But to her massive surprise, the woman widens her eyes in astonishment when she is faced with the figure of her young master. Slowly pulling back his hood, the protagonist faces the caretaker, noticing how exhausted she looked. Completely in shock, the young woman asks the reason the lord had left the castle, thinking something terrible had happened. With that, the devoted maid brings her hand close to the young man's face to wipe away the massive amount of dirt on his skin. Feeling that highly affectionate touch, Isaac goes completely silent, feeling immense peace take over his heart. Standing in the yard, the boy listens to his caretaker warning him that there was no way he could enter there. Then the very worried woman warns him that her son has a contagious illness and fears the lord might end up getting sick. At that moment, the young man places a white mask over his face, asking if it was better for him to enter like that. Then the hare ignores her concerns and hands over a large brown sack full of medicinal plants. With that, the noble tells the young woman to mash the herbs well and boil everything twice to give to the sick boy right away. Walking slowly through the place, the wise boy peeks at the little boy lying on the wooden bed in the dark room. The poor patient rested totally exhausted while using a makeshift mask to try to breathe much better. Noticing the blue spots on the child's face, the scholar is absolutely certain that it is mana poisoning. In that instant, the sad mother approaches crying heavily while trying to wake up her beloved sleeping son. With much effort, the little boy slowly opens his eyes, showing he is feeling immense weakness throughout his body. Looking at the visitor, the boy asks with a weak voice for the little master not to fire his dear mother. The patient feels very guilty, mentioning that the caretaker skipped work just to look after his terrible fever. Hearing that, the protagonist gives a very gentle look, assuring him that he would never fire his dedicated ally. Then the lord pats the sick boy's head, saying that the woman is the only person who brings him good wheat bread. Time passes quickly, and soon a new sunny day illuminates the grand blue sky, brightening the beautiful white clouds. Then we see the brave young man standing in front of a huge dark cave, accompanied by an old guide holding a light. Looking at the spooky stone mountain, the noble wants to know if the man is certain that the place is a limestone mine. The worker confirms the information, receiving a nice gold coin from the boy as payment for the excellent service. With that, the villager warns that several people have gone missing around there, but the mage just says thanks and walks into the darkness. Proceeding alone through the cave, the hare deduces that that place is the perfect nest for the terrible winter beasts. Standing near the entrance, the young man activates his strong magic, deciding to do some good preparation before moving forward. Thus, the little hare exudes a grand golden glow, illuminating his whole body to begin the strong spell. He remembers that after opening new magic pathways, he managed to use incredible spells without hurting his small body. But walking into the cave, the boy knows there is a huge limit or his mana vessel could break. The lord figures he doesn't know the exact number of spiders in the place, so he can't use spells carelessly. Then the little mage's footsteps stop near a small bush, revealing that he would need some major help. That major help was the famous ice belladonna, which had beautiful little shiny berries on its leaves. The scholar kneels near the plant, noting that it would be a deadly poison against those dangerous cold monsters. Pulling the leaves, the noble finds it highly ironic that the monsters live in the exact same habitat as their biggest natural weakness. At that moment, the little boy tosses a large pile of that poisonous wild plant into his leather backpack. But looking at his injured fingers, the healer regrets not wearing gloves, since the plant was incredibly potent. Tying up the bag, he states he made many magic stones in his castle and was now finally well prepared. With everything ready, the little guy walks with determination toward the massive rocky cavern to start his mission. Then the boy's boots touch the rocky floor, and he courageously enters the home of those terrible spiders. The hare's golden glow illuminates the dark stone walls as he explores the massive lair of the monsters. Looking into the grand abyss of the place, the mage reflects that meeting an end by falling from that height would be very stupid. Realizing that his destination is all the way at the bottom, the little lord wonders how he would manage to climb all the way down. Suddenly, the adventurer finds an old piece of wood attached to some ropes tossed in the corner of the cave. The object was actually an old suspended ladder descending all the way through the heavy darkness of that huge stone pit. At that point, the noble's mind remembers the day he asked if his nanny's little boy was the only one suffering from the illness. Assessing the great danger, the young man takes a deep breath and gulps hard as he faces that long and scary descent. But gathering all his courage, he firmly grips the old rope of the wooden ladder to begin his mission. With that, the little hero carefully climbs down the precarious steps, using his magic to illuminate the entire abyss. After a very tense descent, the boy's boot finally touches the solid stone floor at the bottom of that massive cave. Arriving safely, the adventurer sighs in great relief while dusting off his heavy clothes. At that moment, fatigue hits the little lord's body, making a drop of cold sweat roll down his pale face. Then he walks to a more open area, confirming he found the right lair upon seeing the disturbing scene. The floor of the place was covered in huge skulls and bones of animals that were hunted and totally drained by the beasts. With this, the scholar kneels near the remains and becomes quite terrified upon recognizing human remains. Looking at the sad evidence, the noble deduces that those victims were the poor missing residents of the village. But suddenly, a deafening noise echoes through the place, and a giant ice leg brutally pierces the rocky ground. Startled by the surprise attack, the boy's eyes widen as he realizes he was completely surrounded by danger. Quickly, the agile mage jumps back, managing to dodge that scary winter spider at the very last second. Landing on the ground very firmly, the hare faces the colossal creature and prepares to engage in hard combat. With a swift movement, the boy raises his glowing hand, summoning a sphere of extremely hot flames. Thus, he fires the massive fireball at the bizarre frozen monster, lighting up the entire lair with a strong attack. Knowing that the creatures fear intense fire, the wise boy creates a large barrier of flames to keep the enemies away. Taking advantage of the spider's distraction, the protagonist takes the items out of the backpack, saying he needed to prepare. In that instant, he grabs a clean cloth from his bag and slowly ties it over his own face to protect his breathing. Finishing securing his mask, the brave young man gets ready to exterminate all those cruel beasts once and for all. Then the young man places the bag full of the powerful herb on the cave floor to initiate his genius and lethal plan. Next, the scholar kneels in front of the dangerous creatures and focuses intensely to cast his strong magic. With a very focused look, the masked hare takes a deep breath, knowing that attack needed to go very well. Using his magical power, he pushes the large cloth bag toward the massive and scary ice monsters. At that moment, an intense blast of fire hits the bag, igniting all the poisonous plants in a matter of seconds. With that, thick and strong green smoke begins to billow from the flames, spreading quickly throughout the gloomy lair. As soon as the toxic fog hits the massive spiders, they back away scared, feeling the powerful effect of that plant. The clever protagonist observes the beast's reaction, noticing that his great venomous trap was working. However, the furious beasts don't give up and unleash a huge, dangerous rain of ice spikes at the little boy. But with a lot of agility, the little noble takes a quick leap backwards, managing to dodge that very deadly attack. Landing safely on the ground, the adventurer stares at the crystals embedded in the stone, noting the immense fury of the enemies. Then the brave young man raises both hands and focuses all his powerful mana to create a giant fireball. Without wasting time, he hurls that massive fiery spell directly into the horde of winter spiders. With this, a brutal explosion lights up the darkness of the cave, causing heavy damage to those terrible creatures. At that moment, the wise warrior narrows his eyes with great determination, declaring that the real hunt was just beginning. Time passes, and the scene soon changes, showing the beautiful shelves full of books in the office of the huge royal castle. Sitting at his large sunlit desk, young Isaac writes a long letter with a quite irritated expression. Using his quill, the boy questions on paper what was happening for things to reach such a bad point. At that moment, the hare stands up and stares at the landscape through the window, wanting to understand the abandonment of that humble village. Thus, the Lord's mind remembers an arrogant noble yelling and blaming the village leader for not protecting his own people. At the window, the young man mutters angrily, complaining about the immense noise happening right outside the castle. With this, he gets up from his large desk and decides to ask the employees to cover up all the windows in the place. But the boy quickly changes his mind, figuring it would be much better to move down to the huge basement for good. Then the scholar deduces that down there it would be much quieter to focus on researching a special condition. Analyzing his plan, he considers covering the walls with a special stone that is super resistant to magic. So the hare turns around with a gentle smile and asks his caretaker for his opinion on this grand idea. Hearing the words, the employee widens his eyes slightly, showing he is quite apprehensive around the master. Faced with his silence, the lonely lord stares at the large empty room, regretting not having his beloved ally there. The little mage's expression shows immense sadness upon realizing he was completely alone once again. Muttering quietly, the silver-haired boy simply accepts the sad reality of his cruel fate. With this, the young wise boy returns his full focus to his workbench illuminated by the large glass window. The skilled young man keeps writing endlessly, noting down all his vital tactics on the piece of paper. Even though he feels immense fatigue, the dedicated boy stays strong and well-focused on completing the preparations. Thus, his pen slides swiftly across the page, recording new crucial spells for his survival. The protagonist's gaze overflows with strong determination, proving that nothing could take away his intense focus. At that moment, the harsh words from the past complaining about the massive tragedy echo through the young man's thoughts. Back in the lair, the hare plans to use the toxic smoke to slowly suffocate the monsters in that place. Understanding the danger of the lethal poison, the boy decides to use that cloth over his face and activate his large magic aura. With the fabric acting as an initial filter, he states he will use his dense energy to clean out all the inhaled gas. Then the strong greenish smoke advances quickly, dominating the rocky darkness of that massive stone cavern. With this, the protagonist compresses the large fireball and uses a strong alteration magic to remain fully on guard in the area, so he casts the purification spells and fire magic alongside the alteration skill entirely simultaneously. The hare reveals he can use 3 spells at the same time through his magic pathways, guaranteeing plenty of time in the big fight. At that moment, the wise boy points his little finger directly at the cruel ice monsters, saying a dark and cold goodbye. With that, a gigantic fire explosion devastates the entire lair, melting the dangerous creatures with a very hellish heat. The immense sea of fire advances through the dark cave, swallowing the winter spiders while the brave boy walks through the area. Walking through the fire, the boy notices that the monsters burn very well, but points out that the thick smoke could also suffocate him. Feeling his body's limit, the noble falls exhausted onto the rocky floor. Realizing he needs to end this tough hunt quickly, the scene focuses on the huge ice stalactites on the cave ceiling, demonstrating the freezing cold of the dark environment. Then the young boy continues his walk, noticing a large amount of water soaking the entire floor of that cold place. Shivering heavily, the adventurer hugs his own body, regretting the constant ice and wishing he hadn't taken off his thick coat. Stepping firmly on the crystalline floor, Isaac is surprised to notice that the temperature dropped drastically until everything there froze. But suddenly, the protagonist's gaze shows a huge shock when he notices something incredibly bizarre on the ceiling of the cold dungeon. The lighting reveals hundreds of huge gooey blue eggs stuck to the rocky ceiling, leaving the boy totally perplexed. Observing the immense amount of disgusting cocoons, the scholar deduces that a scary creature must have laid all of that there. At that moment, a sinister and colossal shadow appears right behind the boy, revealing the true mother of that huge frozen nest. The terrible giant monster leaps from the darkness to defend its offspring, and the brave warrior gets ready for the fight. With this, the other winter beasts start to run frantically in the same direction, joining the colossal monster. The young mage focuses deadly glare on the enemies, calmly analyzing the bizarre movement of the arachnid group. Thus, the Lord's mind remembers his old painful memories, wondering why he always has to relive all of this now. But suddenly, a gigantic ice spike falls from the cave ceiling, flying swiftly toward the brave boy. The hair widens his beautiful blue eyes, completely shocked by that powerful surprise attack. Quickly, the agile warrior takes a huge leap backwards, managing to narrowly escape the deadly danger. Then the immense frozen stake hits the stone floor, causing a loud crash throughout the dark dungeon. Landing safely, the mage stares at the impact spot, realizing just how dangerous that new situation was. With this, the protagonist grits his teeth, very irritated, feeling angry that his premonitions are always right. At that moment, a monstrous winter spider queen appears, revealing she is the true owner of that nest. The young wise boy remembers that this giant species, completely different from the other normal spiders in that region. Then he notices that this colossal beast has immense resistance to fire and can exhale freezing magic. And to prove it, the terrifying monster charges fiercely, preparing a large lethal spell against the boy. Realizing the threat, the silver-haired noble goes on high alert and prepares to dodge the severe danger. Without hesitation, the boy throws himself to the side while the huge blast of ice magic grazes right past his body. Thus, the beast's powerful freezing breath hits the rocky ground, creating a massive wave of pure cold in the environment. The brutal magic causes a huge impact, freezing everything around and generating a massive cloud of ice in the area. From the force of the strike, the little lord is thrown far away, landing with a lot of pain on that very hard floor. Lying on the ground, Isaac realizes he needs to finish this difficult battle soon before it's too late. At that point, the adventurer gathers all his strength and stands up, breathing heavily due to immense fatigue. His eyes fill with immense determination and focus completely on the enemy, knowing exactly what he had to do. Using all his speed, the boy points his hand and fires a powerful ball of flames toward the massive target. The magic attack hits the creature's face head, causing a strong fiery explosion that lights up the cavern. The boy was already expecting this, noting that those normal flames wouldn't burn the queen like they did to the others. But the only advantage in the middle of this nightmare is that the monstrous creature doesn't have much agility in its movements. Suddenly, the adventurer feels extremely dizzy, closing one of his eyes while his physical exhaustion starts to weigh him down. With this, the hare understands that his fragile 12-year-old body's reaching its limit after using so much magic all day. Then the terrible winter beast steps forward, slamming its heavy ice legs on the ground and causing a major tremor. Noticing the approach, the young lord widens his eyes, understanding that a single mistake there would cost him his life. Then the scary spider raises its body brutally, getting ready to launch another one of its terrifying strikes. Without wasting time, the massive monster fires a gigantic, sharp ice stake toward the little warrior. The dangerous magic attack rips through the cold cave air, flying rapidly to pierce the target without any mercy. Totally in shock, the wise boy notices the deadly threat approaching and tries to think of some quick form of defense. In a pure reflex of survival, the boy throws himself backwards, using his heavy leather backpack as a good shield. And the impact of the ice attack is so absurd that it ends up generating a strong shockwave, throwing the noble far away. Sliding across the frozen floor, Isaac grits his teeth, cursing the fact that his premonitions are always spot on. At that moment, the colossal arachnid queen advances even more, demonstrating all of her imposing and dark superiority. The scholar remembers that this leader has high fire resistance, and also exhales highly freezing magic. Thus, the creature raises its long, sharp crystal legs, fully ready to impale the poor adventurer. But refusing to give up, the brave young man grabs his shovel and envelopes the object in intense flames to defend himself right away. With a huge surge of momentum, the warrior swings the flaming tool, colliding with great force against the enemy leg. Then the brutal impact generates a new wave of power, completely destroying that dangerous ice spear of the monster. Overcoming his own limits, the little mage grips his shovel tightly, showing absolutely no fear of that challenge. With an accurate strike, the boy deflects the queen's massive leg using his tool and breaking all that deadly ice. Because of this, the force of the impact is so great that it sends the terrible monster's leg flying violently to the side. Taking advantage of this incredible opening, the little adventurer jumps very high, preparing a strong counterattack against the creature. Then the brave warrior brings down his shovel with much fury, trying to hit the huge beast's head without any mercy. But unfortunately, the beast blocks the strike, and the shockwave throws the young lord backwards, making him fall onto the stone floor. Sliding across the slippery surface, the young man tightly grabs onto an ice rock, trying to stop that intense movement. At that moment, the colossal arachnid queen steps back angrily, letting out a terrifying roar across the large, dark cave. Isaac digs his feet into the frozen ground, knowing he had to endure that heavy pressure to make it out of the tough battle alive. Thinking fast, the mage deduces he has no more agility to shoot fire, and even if he landed a hit, the beast would be very resistant. With this, the scholar creates a beautiful flame in his hand, deciding to let go of his weak long-distance attacks for now. Thus, the fire's light illuminates the cave, and the boy reveals he is creating a completely different magic from the previous ones. Focusing his mana, the brave noble changes the color of the flames to a bluish tone, while compressing everything with great force. Then the hare's face reflects that immense magical glow, proving he was at his physical limit from so much exhaustion. And with a scream of pure rage, the little warrior launches all that gigantic fiery power directly at the large cold monster. Completely amazed, the huge queen notices the deadly threat arriving and freezes in place, staring at the blue light of her end. The boy's intense gaze overflows with a strong thirst for victory, hoping that the powerful strike will quickly end the nightmare. Then the colossal ball of blue fire hits right in the creature's face, completely crushing the hard defense of the ice beast. In that instant, the hot flames swallow the monster whole and rapidly burn off all that very scary silver fur. With that, a violent magical explosion shakes the massive dungeon, illuminating everything with an incredibly brutal blue flash. Because of this, the dangerous winter beast turns into ashes in a matter of seconds, feeling the supreme fury of the little hare there. But the boy notices that his small arm is stuck in that ice, trembling too much from exhaustion to manage to break free. With this, he makes a gigantic effort and finally manages to rip his hand out of that enormous frozen beast. Totally out of strength, the brave warrior is thrown backwards while feeling immense relief for having escaped his end. At that moment, the fearsome winter spider turns into a large sea of blue fire, burning down to the very last drop of its energy. Then the young mage falls unconscious onto the hard stone floor, feeling the heavy weight of that intense and scary battle. And from the monster's remains, a beautiful glowing stone starts plummeting swiftly through the cold air of the massive dungeon. Then that strange luminous object hits the frozen ground, bouncing very lightly next to the little adventurer. The bright bluish crystal exudes strong pure magic, proving to be the valuable reward for defeating the terrible queen. A long time later, the noble slowly opens his beautiful blue eyes, trying to understand where he was after that huge ordeal. Then he hears soft whispers in the dark room and quickly recognizes the gentle voices of his beloved employees there. The lackey shows immense concern, saying that his dear master had gone all the way to the dangerous abandoned mine. The lady replies that the boy had the great help of a local hunter to find that very gloomy idiot. Hearing that, the wise boy remembers hitting his head on the floor after finally defeating the huge ice beast. But to his great luck, the brave young man woke up shortly after and managed to walk out of that dark cave. And using his very last bit of strength, the hare walked to the village where he found his loyal caretaker wandering around. Because of this, the little boy ended up passing out from sheer exhaustion, falling straight into his great, scared Ali's arms. Back in the present, the scholar hears the sweet woman confirming that her little boy's terrible illness was cured. Then the man smiles relieved, praising the good heart of his little master, even though he's been quite sensitive lately. Hearing those sweet compliments, the embarrassed protagonist gets his whole face red under the heavy blankets. At that moment, the boy decides to sit up in bed, calling for his loyal guard and leaving the two adults quite shocked. The employee asks why the young man went alone to that dangerous place, making him hesitate. The noble thinks he can't tell the truth about the monsters and says he just fell while picking plants. Quickly changing the subject, Isaac asks about the sick little boy, and the nanny confirms his great improvement. Then the hare smiles in relief at the good news, asking everyone to keep that poisoning a secret. He explains that the old scholars of the kingdom would cause a huge uproar if they found those fallen beasts in the mine. With that, the woman questions how he knew about those herbs, sensing the mage lying about having read it all in an old book. At that moment, the loyal guard says they need to drop the subject and leave right away because of the heavy snow, but the protagonist warns that if the castle finds out about this midnight escape, the poor lackey would suffer a major punishment. Because of this, the kind caretaker hands him a huge basket of fruit, while the young man puts on his coat. The employee reveals that all the villagers sent those beautiful ripe apples as a token of immense gratitude. Looking at the gift, the silver-haired boy grabs one of the fruits and stares at the object in a very thoughtful way. Then the little lord raises his arm with the shiny apple, telling the woman to use it all to make a tasty jam. Then the wise boy takes a very excited bite of the food, wanting to eat this wonderful sweet upon the nanny's return to the castle. The sweet lady listens to the noble order another week off for her to look after her beloved child until he fully recovers. Quite shocked, the woman hugs the basket, asking if the cruel head butler would accept such a kind gesture. With a proud look, the young mage leaves her confused by asking, who said she would just stay home resting. Understanding the boy's hidden kindness, the dedicated Ali's eyes fill with tears, feeling gigantic gratitude. At that moment, the hare gives a beautiful, sincere smile, suggesting that she bake a delicious apple pie as well. Thus, the woman happily agrees while the heavy snow keeps falling through the cold night of the humble rocky village. Time passes, revealing the dawn of a new, calm day with the bright sun shining in the beautiful blue sky of that vast region. Setting the beautiful scene, we see the castle's large backyard while the young lord runs, focusing on his daily training. Panning, the boy continues his heavy morning run, sweating a lot to manage to overcome all his limits. Then a whole week goes by, and the dedicated young man runs quickly up the garden stairs with a lot of effort. Throughout this long training period, the protagonist notices that his own mana vessel has also changed quite a bit. Observing his energy, the scholar realizes that the old 3 magic pathways have now turned into a total of 4. Because of this, his mana became more stable, allowing him to cast 4 very strong spells completely simultaneously. The adventurer deduces that all that intense battle against the spiders helped a lot in this incredible and unexpected result, but he is also absolutely certain that running diligently every day contributed immensely to this evolution. Using magic consumes great mental strength, and the boy knows that if the physical body breaks, his mind also ends up failing along with it. Thus, Isaac concludes he hit his limit in the dark cave simply because he had that fragile child's body. Running out of breath, the noble's mind remembers an old warrior from the past named Lucas, who always trained his physique. This old training partner always displayed a huge friendly smile during those sweaty days of hard effort. Coming back to the present, the hare clenches his fists, feeling strong determination taking over his entire fragile heart. But suddenly a deep voice calls for the little master, totally breaking that focused and tense training atmosphere. Then the young man wipes his sweaty face, noticing the approach of the castle's head butler accompanied by another person there. Standing in the area, the suit-wearing employee seriously warns that the day of the boy's regular medical exam has arrived. With a nice smile on his face, the polite doctor bows, wanting to know how the Lord was feeling today. The wise boy reflects that this famous doctor was hired by his father, but unfortunately, he knows nothing about his anomaly. Then the doctor evaluates the patient, guaranteeing there are no problems and noting that the boy looked much healthier now. Even so, the man decides to change the medicines, leaving Isaac annoyed to see that doctor draw false conclusions from it. Opening the briefcase, the man reveals beautiful vials of potions and says that the panacea would help stabilize all his magic. At that point, the protagonist holds the small purple vial, deducing that his beloved father really sent something of high quality. But the boy remembers that this famous drink acts only as a powerful strength stimulant for all soldiers. With this, the hare's mind understands that this supposed stabilizing effect came from a huge translation error, so the true power of this liquid would be to act as a lethal poison for people suffering from excess energy. However, the wise boy hides the truth from the doctor, knowing the liquid would really help him create his new pathways. At that moment, the ignorant employee in white just turns his back and walks calmly toward the exit. Holding the large box, the boy focuses his full attention on the strange butler who was still standing near him. The old man in the suit breaks the long silence, asking why the Lord was acting so calmly today. He asks this because the young man always threw a huge fit, kicking out everyone who stared at him there. Smiling, Isaac replies that his tantrums scared the doctors away and asks if he should yell at them again. Faced with this sharp remark, the experienced employee just narrows his eyes, analyzing the boy in complete silence. Suddenly, the butler mentions hearing rumors that the boy had cured the sick kids from the humble village. Hearing that revelation, the young man's eyes widen, feeling a massive chill run down his entire body. Then the older man confesses to having interrogated the knave lackey, and ended up uncovering the whole truth about that long night. And keeping his posture, the suited man states that the council would act quickly if they knew about this dangerous midnight escape. The hare starts breaking into a cold sweat, paying very close attention to the head employee's serious promise not to report anything. But walking right past the boy, the man asks him to control himself from now on to avoid causing more headaches. Looking over his shoulder, the serious employee finishes his strong statement, saying he has been watching the Lord since very early on. Completely tense, the protagonist reflects privately that he will never be able to let his guard down around this tough man. The hare reflects that this old butler has always been a very cold man who usually kept a long distance from everyone. But taking the boy's bag, the man asks that if he really can't hold back, he should just discuss his plans beforehand. With that, the wise boy listens closely, remembering the old words of an old acquaintance on his deathbed. This man faithfully served the entire grand family until their total ruin, ending up losing his own life in the process. With this, the young lord smiles, understanding that deep down the employee cares a lot about him, thanking him for all his care. Hearing the sweet thank you, the serious older man slightly widens his eyes, looking quite surprised by that docile attitude. Then the suit-wearing man changes the subject, wanting to know if there's a big reason for the boy's intense morning runs. The little noble focuses his gaze, processing that strange question and trying to come up with a good excuse for his training. He answers that all the great mages trained their physique, proving that a magical body needed plenty of physical preparation. At that moment, the dedicated head butler stares at his little lord through his shiny glasses in a very thoughtful way. The scene soon shifts to the huge workroom, revealing the experienced employee writing everything down on a long registry paper. Then the worker wraps up his detailed verification, confirming that the firstborn cured the sick from that village. The man documents that the boy's sad anomaly prevents the use of magic, figuring the boy should become a good alchemist. With this, the old man smiles relieved, deducing that this excellent news would also reassure the little protagonist's father. Suddenly, light knocks on the large wooden door break the night's silence, and the boss tells the mysterious visitor to enter. The door opens slowly, revealing a beautiful red-haired maid looking very apprehensive, apologizing profusely for interrupting his work. The suited man turns his face, slightly surprised, recognizing the young employee and wanting to know the reason for that visit. Gripping her hands with a lot of fear, the dedicated maid displays strong distress, asking for permission to report a massive issue. Then the young woman confesses in a frightened tone that several maids in that huge castle kept disappearing without leaving a trace. With this, she states that her loyal friend worked hard for a long time and would never run away from the place, abandoning her duties. The redhead cries with great fear and says she is absolutely certain that something very terrible happened to her poor friend. Then the girl's mind imagines the sad young woman fallen on the dark floor of some bizarre place, suffering a cruel fate. But going back in time, we see another blue-haired maid thinking this whole disappearance story is quite strange. Back then, the young woman was saying that 3 employees had vanished, while a sweeper said that place was bad news. With a weird smile, the cleaner blames the cold weather and the local monsters, but the employee doesn't buy that excuse. Then the girl in blue guarantees her colleague would never just run away out of nowhere, because she worked very hard to cure her sick father. But the malicious sweeper just laughs sadistically, suggesting the girl must have gotten tired of taking care of that sick old man. Hearing that, the 2 maids get furious and tell the lackey to shut his mouth, but the man suggests she ran off with someone. Then the strange employee points out it was just a joke, and reveals he has a bizarre theory about these disappearances. With a very dark look and raising his finger, the man asks the girls to listen very closely to his idea. The scary lackey suggests that all those women ended up becoming major victims of some terrible dark magic. He reminds them that that massive stone castle houses an entire lineage of mages, making it a perfect spot for that. And to make matters worse, the young heir's condition was not good at all, pushing the head of the house to look for any ritual to cure his son. The poor women are left completely in shock at the bizarre idea that their loyal friends served as mere sacrifices. The sweeper displays an evil smile, challenging the redhead and warning that this crazy grand theory could be the absolute truth. With great anger, the maid defends the lord of the house, reminding him that the noble even took in a dirty criminal like that sweeper. With that, the man just turns his back and walks away across the grass, while the employee says he crossed the line. But suddenly, the insolent employee widens his eyes and turns his face, completely terrified of something right behind the group. The protagonist appears sporting a slight smile on his face while asking to hear all the details of that strange theory. Trembling from pure fear and sweating cold, the pale criminal gulps hard and starts reporting the major events from the dark past. The frightened green-haired lackey swallows hard and starts detailing the weird disappearances. He recalls that the first woman to vanish mysteriously was a humble maid named Held. And a few weeks later, another young woman named Clara also disappeared without leaving a single trace. Thus, the final victim was Sweet Annette, who went missing after attending a mass on the weekend. Then back in the massive office, the terrified lackey stares at the master waiting for some reaction. The hare looks at him with an extremely cold gaze, wanting to know why he suspected his lord. Completely sweaty, the employee gets scared by the intimidating force of that little light-haired noble. With this, the wise boy tells the cowardly young man to be very honest, promising he wouldn't hand down any punishment. At that, the criminal hesitates a lot, and the mage immediately asks if the man thought he was the actual culprit. Sensing the danger, the sweeper stutters, and the protagonist smiles, noting that the answer was very obvious. At that moment, the young man asks him to think of loyal hands, who spend all his time looking after his master. The fake man gives a nervous smile, and his mind focuses on the fact that the ally always complains about his multiple burns. Suddenly, the boy's face darkens, making the mood heavy and causing the lackey to freeze with fear. Thus, the scholar states that if he wanted to sacrifice anyone, the annoying sweeper would be his very first choice. Desperate at the mortal threat, the poor coward screams for mercy, begging for his own life. Keeping calm, the lord listens to the crying man who is begging to live and asks if he wanted to be saved. And with a clever smile, the brave young man decides to use fear to his advantage, ordering the servant to work for him. Completely shocked, the lackey clasps his hands, accepting the deal to manage to escape his certain doom. Time moves forward, and the dark night soon takes over the massive castle, covering everything with a large, starry blanket. Swiftly, a strong and intense magical blue flame ignites, revealing the focused young man's immense power. Sitting on the bed, the young lord fires a strong blue flame magic toward the door, calling out the maids' names. With that, the powerful fireball hits the redhead dead on, leaving the poor employee totally scared by that attack. Then the intense magic flames swallow the woman quickly, lighting up that entire dark room with a huge flash. So the little mage raises his finger with a beautiful smile on his face, confirming that those were the girl's true names. The protagonist's gaze reflects that strong blue fire as he remembers the day he lost his beloved caretakers. In that dark time, these 2 kind girls were the only ones who voluntarily offered to look after the hare. The scene changes, showing a valuable magic potion vial totally shattered on the luxurious floor of that huge, fancy room. At that moment, a few drops of red liquid start to fall and mix with the strange purple liquid spilled on the stone floor. Then the employees enter the room and the boy tells them to leave, but the redhead notices the injuries on her master's hand. However, the boy loses his patience and yells very angrily, ordering the 2 maids to get out of there as fast as possible. The lord points at the broken glass, stating that those potions were trash and forbidding them from bringing that again. With great pity, the loyal caretaker tries to calm the young man, asking him not to lose hope, because everything would get better soon. Hearing those sweet words, the boy lowers his face with a very dark expression, questioning the meaning of that hope. Taken over by immense sadness, the wise boy asks if they knew the pain of taking a loved one's life with your own hands. Then the hare clenches his injured little fist, showing he carries a heavy guilt for all those losses. Seeing the boy's great suffering, the blue-haired young woman lowers her eyes, agreeing that she understood all that intense pain. With a hollow look, the maid confesses that she also ended up causing the loss of a great friend through her own choices. Hearing that unexpected revelation, the little noble is quite surprised, wanting to understand that sad story better. The redhead stares at her coworker in complete shock upon remembering the mysterious disappearance of an old ally. Then the girl's mind recalls the strange sweeper, revealing that this whole mess had started about 2 months ago. The poor maid cries in regret, stating she could have saved her dear friend if she had just reached out her hand. With that, the woman ends up taking a step back, accidentally stepping on the glass shards of that broken potion on the floor. Then the sweet young woman comforts the mage, saying she understands the situation, and that everyone makes terrible mistakes without any intention. The little noble listens to those beautiful words in complete silence, feeling the heavy burden of guilt lighten, just a little. Admiring the ally's sad look, the lord remembers that this strange pessimism actually brought him some comfort back then. But the little boy deeply regrets not asking for more details about that tragic disappearance in the past. Suddenly, loud knocks on the door totally break the room's tense atmosphere, making the large blue flame vanish right away. Outside the room, the weird lackey announces loudly that he was there to speak with his little master. Thus, the suited man enters the room and the wise boy immediately asks if he managed to discover the real whereabouts of those missing maids. The deceitful lackey confirms the information, revealing he interrogated some local beggars to get the best clues. With a fully focused look, the silver-haired boy tells the man to cut to the chase and reveal the whole big truth. Smiling, the investigator says the women fell victim to slave traffickers using false promises of a better life. At that moment, the sweeper scoffs, pointing out it would be useless to use middlemen to run away, proving the poor girl's stupidity. Hearing that entire explanation, the hare agrees with his experienced informant's harsh logic, finding it all very coherent. With this, the arrogant subordinate laughs privately at his young lord's face, thinking he was just an innocent and silly child. But the man quickly widens his eyes, realizing he'd use that sad situation to gain a massive advantage. Then the trickster claims he spent a lot of money to manage to pull all those valuable secrets from the poor beggars. With a greedy smile, the scammer alleges he burned through all 20 silver coins given by the noble for that difficult mission. Therefore, the hustler raises his finger, suggesting he deserved a nice extra payment for all his great, valuable work. Staring intensely at the lord, the green-haired lackey points out that that cruel event happened about 2 long months ago. Assessing the situation, the protagonist states that that absurd amount would be more than enough to pay for half a year's salary. But the smart elect just laughs at the situation, thinking he fooled the master while the boy stares at him with a very sharp look. Thinking himself very clever, the fake lackey praises his lord's enormous generosity, wanting to squeeze out even more coins. Then the young mage hands over a simple sheet of paper, calmly asking if the man would accept a new job. With a very friendly smile, Isaac assures him he would be paid very well if he managed to complete that entire task. Completely deluded, the greedy man clenches his fist, accepting the mission on the spot and believing he found a massive sucker. The trickster imagines the little boy as a golden goose, thinking his smooth talking would make him very rich from then on, so the sweeper decides to push his luck, offering to guide the little hare straight to the idiot. Laughing a lot, the scammer reflects that life rewards the boldest, never imagining the tragic fate waiting for him. The scene skips forward showing the green-haired man wearing only underwear, locked inside a very dark cell. Completely in shock, the poor prisoner grabs the cold iron bars of the dungeon, trying to understand the situation. Sweating cold, the coward curses his own luck, wondering how his perfect genius plan ended up going so wrong. Going into full panic mode, the fake lackey shakes the large iron gate, screaming desperately for some help. At that moment, Isaac appears outside the cage, holding a beautiful magic stone while listening to the traders crying. The bright magic crystal illuminates the protagonist's face, revealing an incredibly cold smile aimed at the lackey. The castle's massive sewer had a cold water channel that served as a terrible secret prison for enemies. With this, the prisoner's trembling hands squeeze the bars, showing his giant fear facing that scary boy. Crying a lot, the humble sweeper begs for his own life, asking the Lord to have a drop of mercy on his soul. The adult layman's never getting married, while the boy's hand gives off a sinister glow as he asks if he wanted to survive. Completely changing his attitude, the little master focuses his gaze, telling the poor guy to stop crying and start working hard. Utterly shocked by that coldness, the prisoner hesitates, not knowing exactly what to say to save himself. Then the little lord uses his bright magic to tidy up his own fancy clothes, getting ready to head out. With a completely calm look, the young wise boy stares at the fake employee, waiting for a very convincing answer. Sweating profusely, the trickster smiles nervously, perfectly understanding why the boy became an easy target. But gripping the cold iron bars, the criminal loudly questions why he ended up specifically in that prison. The lackey complains about being almost without clothes while the boy keeps calmly shining his beautiful blue relic. Then the frightened prisoner opens his arms, wanting to know what their grand escape plan would be from now on. Quite irritated, the scammer asks the lord to stop playing with the shiny relic and give some sort of answer. Then the noble points his finger, noting that the fake servant had dropped all that respectful act from before. Because of this, the villain states seriously that he would leave there to look for all those poor missing women. But turning his back, the hare deduces the man wouldn't have any brute strength to break those iron bars. With that, the young mage merely raises one little finger, preparing to leave that huge traitor rotting there. Realizing his own ruin, the greedy man's eyes go wide, feeling true panic take over his entire body. Silence soon takes over that damp sewer, revealing the sad loneliness of those massive, cold stone cells. Trembling in pure despair, the prisoner grabs the door with all his might, knowing his tragic final fate. Clenching his teeth in pure anger, the man laments his terrible luck, cursing his own previous stupidity. The coward's mind drifts to the day he helped escort the little master on a secret trip into the forest. In doing so, he recalls that introducing that terrible mercenary from the big city ended up being a very easy task. Back to the present, the lackey forces a fake smile, begging the kind little boy not to leave him in the dark, but ignoring the screams, the wise boy walks calmly as two bizarre and dangerous shadows appear in the long corridor. Completely sweaty, the fake servant widens his eyes, realizing the mortal danger of that tense situation. Keeping his gaze very cold, the little hare just listens to the coward's lies in total silence. Then the prisoner kneels on the freezing sewer floor, begging the young lord for forgiveness nonstop. The scene changes to the snow-covered backyard, showing the coward tied up and screaming for help. And surrounded by everyone, the traitor claims he lost his mind and regrets deceiving his dear master. The serious butler announces the lackey was an old thug and only survived because he ratted out his accomplices. But showing anger, the suit-wearing man states that this time that dirty man decided to betray his family. Crying desperately, the coward hears the head of the employees reveal he had absolutely no trust in him anymore. Full of fear, the prisoner begs for a second chance, promising he would never lie again. Being ruthless, the older man raises his sword, silencing the prisoner in the middle of that vast snowy forest. Watching it all, Isaac notes the lackey would be very useful if he didn't have such a greedy heart. In that instant, the protagonist's mind travels to the past, vividly remembering that tragic day. At that time, he remembers the henchman selling out the family's secrets and keeping a sweet girl tied up there. The mage reflects that these cursed traffickers spread evil throughout the entire region, destroying the residents. Understanding the danger, the boy deduces this criminal group is the exact same faction that kidnapped his maids. And in the old memory, the cruel thug laughed, grabbing the completely defenseless hostage's hair on the floor. Displaying a sadistic smile, the kidnapper fully understood why the noble was the huge target for those monsters. Talking to his partners, he claimed the hostage was worth a lot of gold and treated her like a mere object. Because of this, the poor girl turned her face full of tears, begging for help that unfortunately never arrived. As a result, the tragic look of the young woman was marked in the little hare's memory as a painful mistake. The hare knows that any threat to his family must be eliminated quickly to avoid massive and painful problems. Then the young man pulls out a sealed document, reminding the prisoner of his promise to do anything to stay alive. With this, the wise boy shows the paper, ordering the fake lackey to fill a small initial task to prove all his loyalty. The scene changes to a dark, heady outlet only by an old swinging lantern on a damp, highly dusty ceiling. In this place, three very nervous men await orders standing before a mysterious leader sitting at a large wooden table. The large mercenary cuts a piece of meat while listening to a disturbing voice asking him to eat properly that day. Then the huge brute takes a heavy bite of the meal, ignoring all the tension from his poor henchmen standing around. Watching that scene, the sweaty helpers hear the same bizarre voice complaining about that big guy's visible skinniness. But pointing his fork, the scary-looking man asks dryly if the mysterious person was truly present there. Receiving only a long silence, the villain frowns, complaining about the complete lack of an answer during that weird moment. Revealing the source of the voice, we see an old skull stuck on a spike, where the criminal promises to use dark magic to see it again. Staring at that bizarre bone, the dark-haired adult questions if that soul's power had weakened that much. Suddenly, the leader changes the subject, asking for his bathwater, and the lackey hesitates, warning that only the poor merchandise was left. Seized by a sudden fury, the massive trafficker charges quickly, grabbing the humble subordinate's face with a lot of force. Demonstrating his immense power, the ruthless boss lifts the poor young man off the ground, using just one of his hands with ease. Without the slightest mercy, the monster eliminates his own partner, splashing a red liquid all over his very dark face. Completely terrified, the other partners sweat cold as they hear the leader announce that that man would serve for his bath. Then the scary mercenary turns his back, saying he would be waiting while the henchman promises to fix everything right away. With heavy footsteps, the feared villain walks down the long stone corridor, slowly vanishing into the Hediot's total darkness. Then the survivors collapse on the freezing floor, panning hard next to their former fallen partner and the bizarre skull. Sitting on the floor, the frightened thug laments his partner's end, blaming all that terrible dark magic of his cruel master. Staring at the dirty plate, the lackey vents that he can't sacrificing so many innocent people for the leader's disgusting meal anymore. With that, the criminal suggests using their own sales merchandise the next time the monster feels very hungry. Then his partner tells him to stop complaining, pulling the poor victim and reminding him they could also lose their lives if they disobeyed. But suddenly, a strange noise echoes through the Hediot, grabbing the kidnapper's full attention and breaking the tense mood. Because of this, the two men sweat cold, staring intensely at the exit, fearing the violent return of their gigantic boss. However, the dark stone corridor remains totally empty and silent, making the dark atmosphere even more bizarre. Completely confused, the henchmen exchange a look of pure nervousness, understanding absolutely nothing about the sudden event there. At that moment, the villain's sweaty faces fill with sheer terror as they hear something moving in that damp darkness. Trembling with fear, one of the thugs questions his ally, trying to find the source of that scary sound of slow footsteps. Thus, the tense duo slowly focuses their vision, noticing a strange invisible presence approaching and feeling an enormous dread. Brutally, someone hidden in the dark grabs the lackey's neck, pulling him into the shadows without giving him any real escape. Taken by tremendous shock, The surviving accomplice calls the Grandmaster's name, seeking help in that terrible situation. But the mysterious invisible figure continues to drag the new victim across the floor in a totally unforgiving and scary way. Sensing his own ruin, the captured man disappears completely down the long corridor without being able to muster a single vain reaction. Watching this relentless attack, the only survivor widens his eyes, terrified by that invader's immense strength. Then a very macabre thing rolls across the floor, making the humble coward collapse completely shocked, losing hope. Staring at the sad scene, the lackey notices heavy footsteps approaching, with the relentless enemy demanding his full attention. Raising a scary, dirty cleaver, the infiltrated traitor stares at the fallen villain, simply asking for a glass of water calmly. Realizing the violent man's identity, the henchman clenches his fragile jaw, fearing the painful end of his entire life. Displaying a bizarre stained smile, the invader stares at his next victim, feeling totally in control of the situation. Then the henchman recognizes his old team partner advancing threateningly, the huge cleaver. Holding his head, the infiltrated lackey looks completely disturbed, demanding to drink some water from there. With a lot of hatred, the man grips the weapon tightly, cursing his tragic fate and questioning his attitude. The fake sweeper's gaze fills with fury, blaming that little master for all this terrible misfortune. The scene then returns to the moment in the prison where the Lord hands over a mysterious paper, demanding the traitor's promise. With a quite serene expression, the silver-haired young man explains that that document was a simple contract. Then the hare lays out the rules, ordering the man to obey blindly and forbidding him from revealing any big secret of his. Hearing the punishment of annihilation, the prisoner goes into a panic, finding those bizarre rules to be very absurd. Therefore, the boy holds out a knife, ordering him to sign with his vital essence and leaving the thug furious. But suddenly, footsteps echo through the dark stone corridor, catching the sweaty imprisoned mercenary's attention. Keeping calm, the little wise boy rushes the lackey, warning that they needed to quickly finalize that dangerous deal. Staring at his target, the boy manipulates the coward's mind, asking if he really didn't wish to stay alive. At that moment, the sound of heavy boots approaches quickly, indicating that someone was running toward that old cell. Then the noble simply holds the large magic scroll, waiting patiently for his new servant's important decision. With the noise getting louder, despair begins to take over the entire dark stone environment there. Completely sweaty, the fake humble man realizes his time was running out, feeling a gigantic and terrible dread. Seeing the henchman's hesitation, the protagonist steps forward quickly, swinging the sharp blade without any mercy. With that, the small weapon cuts the tip of the scared prisoner's finger, splashing a few red drops around the place. Then the strong magic is successfully sealed when the lackey's wet mark finally touches that old mysterious paper. At that moment, a bright blue glow surrounds the young master and the prisoner, confirming the document's grand magic. With this, the Lord displays a beautiful smile on his face, feeling that this advantageous magic contract had worked out perfectly. But suddenly, 3 large thugs appear shouting loudly, wanting to know how the invaders escaped the cells. Sweating cold, the fearful lackey warns about the danger while the wise boy stretches out his arm very calmly. Swiftly, the boy unleashes a strong magic attack, hitting the faces of all 3 criminals at the exact same time. Taking all that powerful blow, the enemies fall hard onto the stone floor, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Quite scared, the servant asks if they lost their lives, and the protagonist just mentions that 3 of them passed out. Completely shocked by that immense power, the fake sweeper wonders how the little boy did all that. Then the silver-haired boy tosses a large, shiny ice stone into the air, acting very chill. The scene moves forward, showing a long sewer corridor, well lit with strong torches attached to the thick walls. Staring at the beautiful stone, the hare tells his lackey that the whole crystal just looked like normal ice. Observing the knocked-out men, the Lord deduces they were simple thugs, analyzing everything very thoughtfully. Faced with this situation, the prisoner stands completely paralyzed, trying to process that boy's incredible powers. Then, forcing a friendly smile, the trickster praises the master's strength, stating he had never seen ice magic before. Soon the two start walking peacefully through that very damp area, lighting up that whole dark path. Then the scholar breaks the silence, asking what was needed to make ice, leaving his experienced ally confused. Therefore, the noble tells him to guess, and the henchman deduces that water would be the main element for that creation. Showing a strong glow in his hand, the hare confirms the statement, and reveals he uses his own magic to create his water there. But the mage warns that this spell wasn't very practical, leaving the greedy man confused by that strange statement. Explaining better, the boy manipulates the air's humidity, revealing the need to shape the water with a lot of focus during combat. The mage creates a strong water whirlpool, warning it is necessary to master compression, condensation, expansion, and evaporation. Then he states that doing all of it at the same time is hard, while the lackey rushes the noble, fearing they'll be captured. But at that exact moment, the cautious henchman hears footsteps echoing through the place, turning his face very attentively. Soon the sweaty ally widens his eyes, realizing that the much-feared hideout guard had finally found them. Facing the new enemies, the hare conjures his bright aura while the guards shout, demanding answers. Without giving them time to react, the young man casts a powerful phase alteration magic, firing a strong ice attack from there. Completely surprised by that tremendous speed, the experienced thug focuses his vision on that intense combat. Thus, the violent blue strike hits the enemy's chest head, on throwing the criminal's body brutally. The fake lackey watches the hard fall, marveling at the gigantic magical talent of that incredible and rare boy. Resuming the calm explanation, Iser confesses that all this vast complexity makes this spell useless in battles. With a serene look, the wise boy reveals he would never waste his precious time using it if he didn't have a rare item. Then the noble shows off the beautiful ice mana stone collected from the fallen remains of that cruel mountain spider queen. Showing off the glowing crystal, he explains that these cores possess extreme academic value, yielding a very high price. With that, the lackey questions the reason for using a weak spell, and the boy replies that he loves the fact that few people know it. Observing the knocked-out guard, the protagonist asserts it is difficult to distinguish a glacial impact from a simple local trauma. With a clever smile, the hero adds that the weapon melts right afterward, leaving not the slightest clue the crime. Understanding the genius of that dangerous plan, the henchman feels a strong chill freeze his own spine right there. Walking down the corridor, the lackey warns that sparing lives would be useless because worms of that level would be replaced. Without looking back, the boy takes down 2 more guards in the way, warning that that was exactly why he left them alive. Displaying a very cold and ruthless look, the young lord finishes his sentence, saying he would only eliminate the leader. Suddenly, a heavy footstep echoes down the corridor, scaring the lackey as a massive dark figure appears before them. Facing the invaders, the big guy questions the reason that duo was wandering through the tunnels of his hideout. At that moment, the fake servant widens his eyes, completely sweaty, recognizing that man's terrifying identity. With this, the duo observes the dangerous enemy slowly approaching with a very heavy aura in that dark place. Trembling with fear, the henchman warns that he is the boss of the thugs and usually crushes people using only his hands. Hearing all that yelling, the feared mercenary displays a very cold look, asking if that was really true. With a beautiful smile on his face, little Isaac states that the enemy's appearance saved him the huge trouble of hunting him down. Exuding incredible power, the young mage focuses strong magic in the palm of his hand, creating a very bright sphere. Then the skilled lord raises his finger calmly, conjuring a gigantic solid ice spear above his head. Without losing a single second, the hare fires his dangerous magic attack, tearing through the air toward the cruel trafficker. Noticing the high speed of the strike, the brute locks his vision, focusing entirely on the bright, deadly weapon. But surprisingly, the monster raises his right arm, deflecting the ice spear with his own bare hands. Seeing this, the coward screams desperately while the noble praises the target's physical strength, deducing his past origin. Soon the big guy just massages his injured wrist, listening to the fearful lackey yell that they would be annihilated there. Maintaining immense calmness, the criminal boss calls the duo's attention, leaving the prisoner even more shocked. Sporting a sadistic smile, the villain points out that those new goods came at a great time for his dark ritual. Staring at the platinum-haired boy, the monster claims that a mage's material would be perfect for his feared dark magic. With thunderous footsteps, the mercenary advances down the corridor, making the fake sweeper beg for mercy, crying. Overflowing with a terrible killing intent, the giant stretches out his massive hand, covering the lackey with a large shadow. Sensing his sad end, the alley shrinks his body, yelling that he was just a normal human and totally useless for that. With that, the henchman gulps hard, trembling with a lot of dread as he notices the enemy's huge hand very close to his sweaty face. But swiftly, a massive ice spear cuts through the air, piercing the big guy literally without any mercy. Shocked, the lackey looks back, realizing that it was the same magic cast earlier by his incredible young master. Being relentless, the silver-haired boy keeps his hand outstretched, showing all his immense control over the spell. Feeling the hard blow, the mercenary displays a terrified look, spitting a lot of liquid onto the floor of that damp and old hideout. Soon the monster's body collapses lifeless, and the lackey observes it all in silence, hearing the lord call him Bill calmly. With this, the hare stares at the alley, breaking the tense atmosphere and appointing him as the newest leader of that entire dirty place. Keeping a very serious look, the bright boy questions if the fake sweeper completely understood his new duty there. Swallowing hard, the scared thug just sweats cold, feeling the enormous weight of that responsibility handed to him. Then the man grips the handle of his large knife with all his might, faithfully accepting that rare mage's tense deal. With a sudden jolt, the lackey screams, running desperately down the long corridor and leaving the protagonist behind alone. Just watching the rushed escape, the wise boy remains in complete silence, taking a deep breath in that dark tunnel. Closing his eyes, the noble reflects that people can end up doing horrible things they never wanted to do in their entire lives. In that instant, his mind visits the hard past, remembering the wise and beautiful words of a dear maid in his room. Looking at his own injured hand, the boy hears the sweet woman warn that those marks would stay there forever. And remembering the warning well, the scholar feels the alley's great weight dictating his only 2 options from then on. Affectionately, the kind maid bandages the lord's injured hand, using a clean white handkerchief in a very loving and sweet way. Staring at the dirty floor, the beautiful girl warns that the little master could easily end up suffocating under the pain of all the guilt. However, the dedicated woman squeezes the boy's hand, telling him that he also had the great duty to live for all of them. With a slightly sad face, Isaac notes that Sweet Ennet gave this strong advice because she carried the terrible loss of her friend. Returning to the present, the fake leader runs desperately down the dark corridor, asking for some water to calm his nerves. Then the little lord just watches the escape in complete silence, stating he didn't need to hear the same advice twice there. At that moment, the memory returns, showing a luxurious carriage leaving quickly from the grand castle during a cold night. Inside the dark vehicle, 2 beautiful maids appear totally trapped and tied up in a corner, being taken to a bizarre place. Displaying a bright golden look, the sad girl remembers that tragic moment, promising to change the whole destiny this time. With strong determination, the sweet employee walks away from the large mansion, swearing never to lose her beloved friends again. Back then, one of the employees was gossiping very happily while sewing some fabric together with the other companions. Thus, the smiling woman commented that rich nobles from the south were looking for beautiful girls from outside to marry soon. Hearing that wonderful news, another working girl showed interest, wanting to try her luck in that new region. Displaying very red cheeks, the girl mentioned knowing someone capable of taking them there, charging only a small amount. Soon the chatty employee turns her face, inviting the focused Annette and the quiet Hill to embark on this great trip together. However, showing a bit of discomfort, the kind woman refuses the invitation politely, saying she needed to take care of her sick father. Going back to the painful report, the sad maid tells the wise master that that was the last day she saw her friends. Keeping his very serious posture, the protagonist clasps his hands, deducing she was taken captive while trying to look for the girls there. Hearing the smart lord, the employee just lowers her head, confirming all that tense theory in total silence. With a look full of so much pain, the girl remembers the terrible reunion in the sewers, revealing that her friends had lost their minds. With that, she confesses that she would also have lost her reason if she had stayed longer in that bizarre place, and the young man completely agrees. The scene shifts to a bizarre slaughterhouse stained red, where poor innocent people were sold and devoured without mercy. Returning to the tense conversation in the luxurious room, the scared employee makes a huge confession, revealing she could have escaped. In the old memory, the girls stared at a rusty cell, noticing that the iron gate of the dangerous captivity was quite loose. In that terrible darkness, the poor girl cried non-stop, sobbing from pure fear and completely traumatized by all of it. Looking at the iron cell, the sad maid stared at her old friend, completely broken and with no hope of living at all. With immense regret, the sweet young woman confesses that everything could have been very different if she had stayed a few more days. Trembling a lot, she grips the old iron bars, feeling a strong pain for having left her beloved colleague behind. Listening to this sad report, the little wise boy focuses his gaze, feeling the massive weight of that entire tragic dark story. Then the employee vents that she would also have ended up eliminating her own ally with her hands if she had stayed in that place. Understanding the grave situation, the young noble thanks her for her courage in sharing all these difficult memories from the past. But at that moment, the sweet caretaker hesitates a little, revealing she still had a strange doubt troubling her mind. The memory soon changes, showing the day the cruel mercenaries decided to send the women back to the large mansion. At that time, the two girls were extremely happy and hugging for finally managing to escape that cruel end. However, the mysterious Hild bit her nails, trembling with fear, claiming that bad things would happen if she returned to the castle. Thus, the girl concluded that her partner would end up losing her own life if she set foot in that grand house again. With a serene look, the dedicated maid asserts that her colleague wasn't afraid of receiving a simple punishment from the masters. Evaluating the clues, the silver-haired boy puts his hand on his chin, promising to investigate this whole massive mystery. The scholar stares at the employee in complete silence while she clasped her hands together in a very sweet and respectful way. Displaying a beautiful smile on her face, the kind woman reveals that another coworker ended up mentioning something quite curious. With this, she claims that the thug's sudden kindness in letting them go was solely because of the young lord's massive influence. Sweating cold, Isaac hides his nervousness, thinking that theory is absurd while noting those girls' great cleverness. Blushing slightly, the sweet girl guarantees everything makes sense, because he would be the only noble to pay attention to simple servants. Being deeply touched, the hare shows a calm smile, listening to that beautiful and sincere compliment coming from his ally. The maid tries to say something else, but the young noble quickly interrupts her, asking them to continue that conversation later. With this, the hare gets up from his huge wooden chair, getting ready to leave that luxurious office quickly. Then the little boy pushes the heavy door and leaves the place, leaving his curious employee alone in that large room. Walking down the hallway, the little wise boy sports a nice smile on his face, showing he is plotting some genius plan. Thoughtful, the protagonist notices the girl's great hidden talent and decides it would be very worthwhile to teach her magic. The scene advances, showing the massive and luxurious castle shining brightly under the warm light of a new and beautiful sunny morning. In the backyard of the place, two employees chat quietly, wanting to know gossip about the return of the beloved old maids. The gossips say that Isaac picked a nasty fight with the head butler to manage to pardon those young women. Suspicious, the servant questions this effort from the master, suggesting the boy was already at an age to have certain silly desires. Passing by, the fake lackey hears everything and walks silently along the castle walls carrying a heavy box. Then, very cautiously, the suited man kneels near the ground, opening an old wooden door hidden in that floor. Arriving in the dark basement, the serious worker stores his cargo in a corner, revealing it to be a very secret hideout. At that moment, another strange man appears from the shadows of the place, calling that infiltrated worker the big boss. Soon the green-haired lackey rubs his hands together, wiping off all the dirt from his heavy work from that exhausting morning. Totally irritated, the traitor scolds his partner, warning that he didn't want to be called that way in a public place. His mind travels to the tense conversation in the sewers, where he explained that eliminating thugs wouldn't solve anything there. But remembering it all, the fake sweeper understands that the clever lord planned to take control of those factions early on. Panicking, the coward squeezes his own head, realizing his life was in great danger in the middle of this plan. Returning to the present, the scared leader sits heavily on some old sacks, sighing, looking quite tense and frustrated. Thus he asks if there were more companions hiding in the mansion, and the lackey confirms the old order to spy on the nobility. With a slight smile, the fake servant deduces that the old leader wasn't just some crazy guy for placing spies in the region's mansions. Then the spiky-haired henchman continues the report, revealing that the old master always used to prepare a certain tribute. Quite surprised by that new information, the suited man widens his eyes, questioning what that offering could be. Thus, the humble thug explains that this mysterious gift was delivered to the Grand Knights at this time of the year. The accomplice confesses that they lived in the sewer because the cavalry protected them, leaving the new leader completely shocked by this. A few days go by and the scene changes to show the young lord standing alone in the middle of his huge bedroom during the dark night. Training hard, the silver-haired boy casts a powerful fire spell, creating a bright ball of flames in his hand. Swiftly, the wise boy steps across the luxurious rug, firing that intense and burning attack toward the wall. But with a very focused look, the protagonist reveals that the massive fire was just a distraction for the real strike. At that moment, a giant solid ice spear appears, spinning right behind that huge flaming sphere launched by him. With this, the powerful blue crystal pierces the intense flames, tearing through the air quickly in a very incredible double magic attack. Soon the sharp freezing magic hits the large bedroom mirror dead on, shattering all the glass with a strong and cold impact. Breathing a little heavily, the hare notes that his magic circuits jump from 4 to 5 after that combat. With that, the scholar realizes he needed to train this double magic a lot, claiming he just got lucky against that big guy. His mind drifts, remembering that the enemy knew the territory well and thought the duo of invaders was extremely weak. Keeping his gaze focused, the boy assesses that cruel trafficker's profound ignorance ended up being his downfall. Then he deduces that all those perfect conditions made the mercenary totally drop his guard, losing his own life right there. Clenching his little fist with enormous force, the brave noble squeezes his nails, correcting that he himself took that life. Completely tired out by the energy spent, the young mage collapses on his soft bed, staring at the ceiling in a very thoughtful way. Remembering the past, the lord recalls that the old Jonas had revealed many things about his family's great enemies. Staring at the ceiling, the noble reflects that all those strong old enemies were specially trained to hunt the great mages. With his eyes closed, the boy understands he wouldn't have the same great luck again, needing to be well prepared for the future. Admiring the night sky, the little hare swears to get much stronger to manage to protect his entire beloved family from danger. Suddenly, the door to the huge room swings open quickly, startling the young man on the bed as an employee shouts his name. Sitting on the mattress, the lord questions the yelling while the rushed maid enters, telling the master to get up quickly from there. Then the focused woman turns her face, ordering the serious butler to quickly bring the little boy's beautiful, luxurious clothes. Totally confused by all that huge commotion, the protagonist wants to understand the reason for all that uproar in his own room. Flashing a big smile, the woman holds up a clean cloth, happily revealing that the master of that mansion had returned. With this, the boy widens his eyes, completely shocked by the big news, while the servant cleans his beautiful sweaty face. Then the dedicated employees get together to dress the little wise boy in his finest and most elegant shirt for that long day. The scene changes, showing the family's massive castle welcoming a mysterious warrior riding a dark horse through the grand gate. Staring at the man's broad shoulders and huge sword, Isaac questions privately if his own father was really there. The scene changes, revealing several white marks scratched on a dark wall, showing the long passage of time in a gloomy place. Inside, a white-haired man remains seated on an old wooden chair, reading under the dim light of a candle. At that moment, the prisoner writes carefully using a beautiful pen, focusing all his attention on that old piece of paper. Suddenly, the door opens and a hooded warrior enters the place, making the old inmate call him father calmly. With this, the experienced man displays a very tired and sad look while observing that entire deplorable situation. Dropping his bag on the floor, the swordsman stares at the prisoner and then pronounces Isaac's name with a very heavy voice. Thus, the two men stare at each other in a deep silence, illuminated only by the small flame in that cramped room. A short time later, several strands of white hair fall onto the dirty floor, cutting through that tense mood in the dark room. In an act of compassion, the experienced warrior uses scissors to cut the inmate's old locks in a very gentle way. Holding the strands carefully, the visitor states he would do that if it were the great wish of that mysterious man there. With that, the huge sword attached to the warrior's back is highlighted while he guarantees that everything would be completely painless. Hearing those strong words, the prisoner shows his sad blue eye, accepting his harsh fate in complete silence. Soon the hooded man finishes the beautiful haircut, tidying up that old man's whole appearance before the terrible end. Staring at the books on the table, the swordsman asks if this was really what he wanted, and the gray-haired man confirms positively. Understanding the sad choice, the visitor just agrees with the tough decision, keeping an immense sadness in his heart. With enormous pain, the man hugs the alle's head, saying that this would be the very last time their paths would cross. This emotional moment shows the strong connection between the two, exuding a profound feeling of loss and parting there. Walking toward the door, the visitor promises to go ahead and wait for him, leaving that cold cell quickly. Standing alone in the middle of that room, the prisoner reflects on his father's request to leave all his regrets behind. Back to the present, the little lord stares at his father in the luxurious library, remembering he hadn't seen him since that tragic day. Staring at his father, the boy calls him softly while the experienced noble reads a long report at his massive work desk. Keeping his posture, the serious patriarch asks about a curious rumor, hearing that the boy cured the kids from the village. Thus the lord confirms the strange story, thinking it even misheard when employee revealed all that. Trying not to draw too much attention, the skilled boy disguises his immense magical talent, saying he just had a lot of luck. Soon the clever hare lies about having read a book on a pulmonary disease with symptoms identical to those of the sad children. Hearing that very well-crafted excuse, the gray-haired leader merely taps his finger on the heavy wooden desk, quite suspicious. Changing the subject, the older man wants to know about his son's health, and Isaac answers relieved for not having blown anything up there. With this, the father praises the supposed work of the famous local doctor, while the protagonist thinks the fake doctor was useless. At that exact moment, the warm sunlight illuminates the beautiful glass of the luxurious office, bringing a great glow to the room. Breaking the deep silence of the room, the young wise boy focuses his gaze, deciding to calmly ask about a distant region. Hearing the question, the family leader widens his eyes slightly, being taken completely by surprise by that curiosity. Being very direct, the scholar really wants to know how things are going at the dangerous winter border of the vast kingdom. Intrigued, the experienced warrior asks the reason for the question, and the hare assures him that one day he will have to fulfill his duty. The father says there's no difference over there, being a very cold place filled with massive monsters and fighting guards. However, with his hand on his chin, the patriarch reveals something curious, remembering having stopped in another big city on his long return. Understanding the massive clue, the boy hides his expression, focusing on a single thought about the terrible sewer in that old place. At the same time, the conversation flows, and the gray-haired man reports that a problematic event occurred at the stop, leaving the young man intrigued. Thus, the experienced leader reveals that a guard attacked the company captain himself, making Isaac deduce that the criminal has already passed away. But surprisingly, the warrior notes that the victim actually requested a tense military tribunal to decide everything right away. Shocked by the news, the little wise boy tries to find a good reason for this while the sound of a door opening echoes in the place. Apologizing for the sudden interruption, two mysterious guests enter the office, catching the patriarch's attention there. Smiling widely, the newly arrived warriors happily greet little Isaac. Noticing how much the boy had grown, keeping his very analytical gaze, the young lord observes every small detail on those two imposing and strong soldiers. Then the skilled boy notices the severe injuries and the large bandage covering that confused man's entire right ear. Analyzing the beautiful emblem engraved on their uniforms, the scholar quickly recognizes the mark of the feared border fortress. Putting all the pieces together, the protagonist concludes privately that the bandaged soldier is the true victim of that fake mutiny. With this, the serious father asks the duo to enter the room and dismisses his smart hare so they can talk alone in that room. Being very obedient, the little lord bows and walks calmly toward the massive hallways of that large mansion. However, before fully closing the door, the silver-haired boy hears the leader authorize the tense military tribunal right there. The taller soldier asks for the traitor's execution to maintain order, while the noble claims the ally is being too impatient. Not wanting to give in to that immense pressure from the subordinate, the experienced patriarch prefers to ask for the injured warrior's opinion. Through a small crack in the door, Isaac sees the bandaged man stating that he would simply follow all the boss's orders. But the impatient colleague doesn't understand so much calm after a cut-off ear, while the wise hare finally walks away from the place. Walking along the long rugs, the young mage gathers all the evidence, processing the massive mystery behind that attack. Displaying a cold look, the boy understands there is a major secret surrounding the strong military men of that dangerous border. Suddenly, the calm and quiet moment is broken by loud, hurried footsteps echoing through that entire huge empty hallway. Soon a sweaty household employee runs toward the hare, asking the noble to accompany him quickly to another place. Totally desperate, the panting lackey widens his eyes, stating it was an emergency and startling the little boy a bit there. The scene cuts to a beautiful and cold balcony on the property illuminated by the strong daylight, showing two figures talking alone. Far from the ears of the other workers, the smart protagonist wants to quickly know about all the confusion from that tense employee. Coughing slightly, the nervous lackey reveals to the young master that he has been hearing rumors about the dirty people trading business in the sewers. Then he explains that some powerful guys received huge bribes to simply turn a blind eye to that crime. Very focused, the silver-haired boy asks the identity of these men while the sweaty ally just swallows hard. Trembling a lot from nervousness, the informant lowers his head, feeling massive fear of revealing the truth to the little wise boy. Gathering a lot of courage, the fake employee confesses that the corrupt ones are the border knights, leaving the lord surprised. Keeping up the tense conversation, the alley reports that the remains of one of the thug henchmen ended up being found at the entrance to the tunnels. However, the informant points out there was a very bizarre detail, noting that the victim only lost his small pinky finger there. Putting his hand in his pocket, the protagonist tells the lackey to continue the story, noticing his messenger's enormous hesitation. With that, the terrified employee shows a scary dark mark on his own hand, stating that happened early today. His mind visits a massive trauma, revealing he woke up with those terrible severed limbs thrown onto his own bed. Aside from all that madness, the enemies also sent a dangerous message using another criminal to threaten the scared leader. Therefore, the message made it very clear that the entire old bribe amount had to be delivered in just 2 short days. Falling into total despair, the suited man cries pathetically, screaming with fear of ending up losing his own fingers. Desiring to survive, the lackey begs for help, entirely blaming the bright boy for putting him in that tough position. Hearing all of that, the young noble just keeps his cold posture, staring at the coward ally without showing any concern. Exuding an imposing aura, the hare ignores that crying, questioning if there was any witness to the henchman's mysterious end. Thoughtful, the informant confirms that there was indeed a spectator, warning that the whole lethal attack happened in a fast and sudden way. Remembering the old report, the vision shows a bright blue glow cutting through the dark air of the tunnel, taking out the target in a single blow. Resuming the conversation, the lackey says the most important detail noticed was that the attacker had a bandage on his head. With his dangerous look, Isaac understands the whole mysterious connection of the case, leaving the fearful leader in disbelief at such coldness. Walking calmly, the Lord tells the informant not to worry, assuring him that he wouldn't lose his own life. The heir's mind drifts, remembering that his experienced father brought those two border warriors to the grand mansion. Then the wise boy deduces that the duo took advantage of the stop in the sewers to quickly eliminate one of the local thugs. Evaluating the appearances, the young man notes that the man with the bandaged face perfectly matches the attacker's description. Taken over by enormous fury, the silver-haired boy grits his teeth, feeling a massive hatred for those fake heroes. Thus, the brilliant protagonist walks with a very intimidating look, muttering about the region's feared guards. With this, he concludes that if the whole story is true, the warriors are nothing but a disease that needs to be eradicated. A short time later, the little noble arrives at the castle's gloomy dungeon, stopping silently in front of a guard there. Surprised by the sudden visit, the experienced sentinel asks why the little master was in that dark place. Without stalling much, the scholar asks if there was an inmate locked up in that place for committing some crime of rebellion. Soon the scene moves forward, showing a dark-haired man sitting on the cold stone floor, completely locked inside an old cell. Staring at the mysterious prisoner, the boy says he came there just to visit him, breaking all the tense silence. Observing everything, the Lord reflects that the main reason for seeking out the convict was to confirm one single, crucial thing. Therefore, his biggest intention was to try to figure out if those strong knights really had a connection to the thugs. Analyzing the serious situation, the boy deduces that the rebel must know something important since he dared to attack his bosses. Being very direct, the smart hair calmly asks if the quiet man knows a feared criminal organization around there. Completing his thought process, the brilliant wise boy comments he has already heard several rumors about their terrible, dirty market. In that exact instant, the prisoner squeezes his own hands very tightly, trembling quite a bit in the middle of the immense darkness. Displaying a look filled with pure fury, the former soldier lifts his face, staring intensely at the little master. Noticing all that strong, threatening expression, the protagonist notes that the face of that criminal was quite familiar. Staring at the inmate, the young lord asks if he knows the real connection between the terrible sewer and his company captain. Hearing this, the injured man remains in a deep silence, showing no desire at all to answer that question. But suddenly, the prisoner pulls his heavy boot back a little, making the old iron chains rattle on the floor. With a sudden movement, the ex-soldier steps forward and grabs the thick cell bars with a lot of force, saying he would be very direct. Staring at the boy with a deadly look, the rebel claims to know absolutely nothing about that whole tense situation. Noticing that clear lie, wise Isaac merely keeps his cold expression, focusing his beautiful blue eyes on the inmate. Maintaining immense calmness, the little hare ignores the rudeness and asks what that scary warrior's name would be. Totally confused by that sudden calmness, the inmate drops his guard, revealing his name was Carlson at that moment. Hearing the fake name, the scholar displays a slight and victorious smile on his face, perfectly remembering that dirty face. Being very perceptive, the platinum-haired boy approaches the grate and calls the man Kyle, wanting to know if he was going to lie. At that exact instant, the fake soldier widens his dark eye, becoming completely shocked and sweating cold from pure terror. Totally losing his intimidating posture, the prisoner steps back in a frightened manner, dragging the heavy chains there. Staring at the little boy as if he were a monster, the rebel questions in total disbelief how he knew his real name. The protagonist's mind travels to an old reading, remembering he heard that name back in the time of a sad civil war. In that tragic history, that whole massive, bloody conflict started right during an important succession ceremony. Soon the text reported that the second prince ended up losing the crown and decided to betray his own kingdom by allying with the empire. Driven by the fury of defeat, this cruel royal member caused a brutal and merciless tragedy on that festive day. After all that cowardice, the people revolted, taking up arms to fight, and the massive leader of that rebel army was Kyle. Returning to the cold dungeon, the young wise boy displays a very serene expression, calmly stating he read that in a book. Thus, he remembers the feared Chronicles of the Villains, which is a famous piece of work full of portraits of the worst criminals. History reported that that inmate was a great genius capable of becoming the seventh master swordsman of the entire continent. Observing the rebel in person, little Isaac can't help but completely agree with that famous old book. With this, the hare notices the man's incredible mana, wondering how much effort he dedicated to get like that. Sporting a smile, the protagonist confesses he can't even imagine how strong the prisoner would become in the future. The wise boy deduces that this talent escaped shortly before the cruel execution, becoming the great rebel leader in his past life. Totally shocked by all that, the prisoner loses his posture and demands to know how the boy knew his true fame. But keeping his cool, the Lord says it's still too early for surprises, revealing he also knew the man was Caitian's son. Hearing his father's name, the ex-soldier takes a step back, feeling a chill and becoming terrified of the boy. Trembling in the old chains, the warrior asks who he was, and the noble questions how the soldier didn't know his master there. Confused, the rebel wants to know where the boy got this information, asking if he was there to take his life. At that, the hare finds the inmate very full of himself, asking why he would care about a simple missing mercenary. Staring at the little guy in a tense way, the warrior still doubts his identity, and the young lord claims not to care about that. Shifting the focus of the conversation, the scholar simply demands to know why the border captains are involved in that dirty market. In a brief silence, the dim light of a candle illuminates the back of the old dungeon while the prisoner reflects on that question. Then the injured rebel drags his heavy chain, stating that if he really was the master, he couldn't answer. With his hand on his arm, the platinum-haired lord points out that the commanders themselves could throw all these crimes onto the inmate's back. Feeling the weight of that massive truth, the fake soldier collapses on the floor, hearing that he would become a highly wanted criminal. Being quite ruthless, the wise boy warns that this way the warrior would never be able to start his grand revenge. Completely defeated, the man lowers his head to the dirty floor, holding his own hands in a deep and painful silence. Thus the scene pulls back, showing the little lord standing in the hallway while the new target remains locked up and hopeless. Walking calmly, the young lord reflects that this prisoner is not someone easy to manipulate like the old ally. Stopping suddenly, the hare turns his face, staring at the dark cell, understanding he needed another major strategy there. Observing the beautiful night sky, the smart boy decides he has no other choice but to lure them all out on his own. The scene changes, showing two mysterious hooded figures walking peacefully down a damp and old stone corridor. Stopping suddenly, the mercenary gets suspicious of all that tense and strange silence, noticing the complete absence of the guards. Then the other shadowy warrior raises his arm, pointing into the darkness, wanting to grab his ally's full attention there. Staring at the old bars, the fake knights notice that all the cells for those poor victims were totally empty. Irritated, the thug complains about the suspension of the bribe and the daring demand from the new criminal leader wanting to meet up right away. Tightly gripping the handle of the heavy door, the hooded man privately wonders if the boss planned to cancel the deal. Opening the old wooden passage, the two experienced warriors are quite startled by the unexpected person on the other side. Showing a huge forced smile, the fearful lackey invites the shadowy dude to come in, sweating cold from pure nervousness there. Trembling intensely, the fake sweeper tries to maintain a good posture while holding the entrance for the imposing invaders. Analyzing the scared receptionist, the knight deduces he is a subordinate of the criminal group, finding that outfit quite bizarre. Maintaining a lot of caution, the experienced man notices the fearful ally's trembling hands, noting that he wasn't carrying weapons. With this, the arrogant border knights enter that dark hall, totally ignoring the weak presence of the fake servant. Standing in the middle of the dark hideout, the warriors look around, not liking that tense and silent atmosphere one bit. In that exact instant, only the irritating sound of cold water drops dripping onto the dirty stones echoed throughout the place. In the back of the hideout, a mysterious cloaked figure waited sitting in the chair, lit only by a solitary candle. Staring at the platinum-haired boy from behind, the hooded man gives an arrogant smile, wanting to know if he was the much-talked-about new boss. Exuding immense confidence, the corrupt soldier finds it completely outrageous for the leader to call them there without preparing a proper reception. Staring at the boy, the imposing warrior asks if that short guy could be the new and feared boss of the criminal group. But the little silver-haired lord just maintains a deep silence, not answering anything to that huge question. With this, the irritated invader points out that the leader must have plenty of lives to spare to summon them there without any reception. Then the huge hooded man takes a firm step forward, exuding a massive and heavy threatening aura in that place. Keeping a cold gaze, the dirty mercenary demands to know if the new master planned to cancel their entire old deal. Being very impatient, the corrupt knight grips the handle of his long sword, getting ready to initiate combat. However, at that exact moment, the dim candlelight illuminates the dark silhouette of the hare sitting in a very relaxed manner. Hearing a calm voice, the scary warrior interrupts his strong attack, becoming totally confused by the scene. Soon the two invaders look at each other in the dark tunnel, noticing something extremely bizarre in that mysterious situation. Realizing the trap, the accomplice notes that the person sitting right there had the tone of voice of a mere child. Then the flame illuminates the wise boy's small body, revealing his true and docile appearance to the enemies. Totally shocked, the big guy sweats cold, not believing he was threatened by such a fragile and defenseless brat. Overflowing with immense fury, the knight asks why the little boy had plotted that whole grand prank. Being very cruel, the hooded man raises his voice, ordering the brat to kneel immediately on the dirty floor. But keeping a beautiful smile, the scholar invites the duo to have some tea and pronounces the names of the two knights. Hearing their true identities, the traders step back surprised, feeling an enormous fear of that rare boy. The scene cuts to a memory from the past, revealing an old and cold wooden cabin covered by a lot of falling snow. Inside the safe place, a soldier smiles very excitedly while holding a heavy and valuable bag full of coins. Amazed by the profit, the corrupt man praises the great ability of the old mercenaries to get so much money. Then the other fake hero examines a golden coin, agreeing that all that wealth would guarantee food and firewood. The memory shows a heavy bag of coins being thrown onto an old wooden table, making a loud clinking sound there. Staring at all that cash, the young recruit appears quite outraged, questioning what those warriors were doing. However, the fake knight simply ignores the boy, grabbing the bag with a lot of greed and marveling at the immense profit. With the cash in hand, the bandaged man smiles relieved, revealing that it would guarantee food and plenty of firewood for a long month. Being very greedy, the bearded accomplice adds that grand fortune could also buy brand new swords for them. At that moment, the corrupt duo starts dividing all the shiny gold coins in a totally unfair and selfish way. Putting away his part of the money, the soldier shows a beautiful smile on his face, claiming that the captain's trash knew how to profit. Returning to the present, the tense scene shows a hot cup of tea on the table while the protagonist listens to this entire story. Sitting at the table, the young lord shows a fake look of understanding, stating that the guards also had their motives. Being very persuasive, the smart hair deduces that the duo desperately needed to raise funds for the Grand Army. Thus, the platinum-haired boy deceives the corrupt men, claiming he understands they had to steal from the mercenaries for a good cause. Remembering the family patriarch, the wise boy confesses that his own father was a very rigid and inflexible man. Falling perfectly for the trap, the traitor gets up from the table very excitedly and confirms that entire made-up lie. But suddenly changing his expression, the little wise boy stares at the knight, telling him he was making too many excuses. Displaying a ruthless look, the noble asks why they kidnapped innocent civilians, and the man tries to blame the captain. Seeing all that terrible and pathetic desperation, the scholar merely stares at them in complete silence, judging the traitorous duo. Keeping a cold posture, the hare closes his eyes calmly, stating he was ready to give his verdict. Following that, the boy opens his bright blue eyes, staring at those two fearful criminals sitting in front of him. Without giving any time to react, the young mage sentences the fake heroes to their end, leaving the cowardly knight very terrified. Hearing the notice from the feared military tribunal, the traitor slams the table yelling, asking if the young man didn't understand them there. Listening to the dreaded verdict, the irritated knight displays a terrified look, grinding his teeth in pure rage there. Without any hesitation, the traitor grabs his weapon, asserting that he shouldn't expect anything from a brat like him. Totally furious, the fake hero turns his face, demanding that his companion not just sit on the bench. With great determination, he orders the partner to get up at once, pointing out that they both were the great swords of the family. Slowly, the warrior pulls his heavy shiny blade, claiming he would do anything to protect his master. Fully drawing the weapon, the ruthless mercenary threatens the lord, claiming to be ready to cut down anything in front of him. Seeing that madness, the fearful partner gets scared, questioning if his partner was really being serious about all that. Trying to convince the ally, the soldier notes that the grand leader of the house still had young little Jonas as in hair. Staring at the boy in a deadly way, the traitor concludes it would be much better to eliminate that terrible ticking time bomb right away. Soon the enemy's long sword emanates a strong bluish power, showing the dangerous killing intent of that cruel man. With heavy footsteps, the warrior advances across the floor, rapidly activating his entire impressive bluish aura around his body. Merely watching the charge, the wise boy shows no dread, finding that whole tense situation quite interesting. Keeping his arms crossed, the little noble notes that the fake hero really planned to use his immense magical power. Overflowing with pure hatred, the corrupt man advances relentlessly, preparing his lethal attack against the fragile child. Watching the strike, the sad companion hesitates, sweating very cold and wondering how things got to that point. His mind flashes back to the past where the two laughed happily, remembering that it all started with a good intention from the duo. Trembling a lot, the big guy tightens his grip on his own sword, questioning the current and cruel actions of those partners. Seeing the fake hero approaching, the protagonist stares at him coldly, asking if that terrible act was for the family. Suddenly, the irritated invader widens his eyes and stops the fatal strike, locking his body completely in place. At that moment, wise Isaac quotes the captain's old oath, where the faithful warrior promised to be the family's shield. Then the scene goes back to the past, showing the strict captain taking the soldier into the snow, wanting to discuss a serious matter. With a deep look, the old leader asserts that a blade capable of cutting anything without breaking is a masterpiece. But pulling out his dangerous weapon slowly, he totally changes the tone of the conversation, making the mood very tense there. Then the master warns that when a perfect weapon gains a will of its own, it simply becomes a demonic sword. Back to the present, the red-haired invader is shocked to see his partner blocking that strong fatal attack. At that moment, a loud metal sound echoes through the hall as strong sparks fly from the violent clashing of the blades. Blocking the strike, the bandaged big guy reveals he only understood the captain's warning after losing an ear. Seeing the betrayal, the enraged warrior agrees that the old boss was indeed right about all that greed. Sweating cold from pure nervousness, the thug realizes that his old friend was fighting seriously to protect the brat. Totally indignant, he curses his partner, asking if the coward lost his mind by defending the enemy. But keeping a firm posture, the large knight accepts the situation, claiming that all of that was just their karma. Pushing the heavy weapon, the sad warrior asks the ally to be honest with himself about their wrong actions. Thus, the two old companions begin a tragic duel in the middle of that huge, dark, and silent hall. Staring at the redhead, the bandaged man confesses that that mountain of money was not used merely to help the border. Hearing the harsh truth, the mercenary locks his body completely, feeling the weight of guilt hit his greedy mind. Without missing this opening, a swift and deadly attack tears through the air, dropping the red-haired criminal onto the freezing stone floor. With that, a few red drops drip onto the dirty floor, marking the sad end of that former traitor to the family. With the fight finished, the platinum-haired boy just observes the survivor, deducing the real reason for the old revolt. Lowering his head, the sad soldier reveals that the duo tried to silence the late boss when the chariot was discovered. However, the young mage finishes the sentence, pointing out that the two lost the fight and the kind captain spared their lives. The memory shows the big guy kneeling while the kind boss cuts off his own ear, asking him to listen to the grand truth. With this, the little lord deduces that the warrior stopped the execution of the old leader because he felt an immense weight on his own conscience. Hearing those words, the remorseful soldier lowers his head, remaining in deep silence in the face of that grand truth. At that moment, the big guy's legs start to tremble a lot, demonstrating all his immense fear and strong despair there. Totally cornered, the bandaged mercenary mutters, wondering what the sad fate of his beloved family would be now. But the calm, wise boy just observes the man, exuding an intimidating aura with his beautiful, bright blue eyes in the dark. Being very cold, the hero states that the knight himself should know how to answer that terrible question better than anyone else. Meanwhile, the fearful gang henchman clutches a strange and heavy dirty sack, seriously considering running away from that highly tense environment. Assessing the entire situation, the platinum-haired nobleboy keeps an analytical gaze on his enemies, showing no mercy. Then the astute protagonist sports a subtle and chilling smile on his face, showing he is in total control of that conversation. Pronouncing the true name of that survivor, the young mage gets the big guy's attention, making the mood very heavy. Being quite direct, the scholar Isaac asks if the criminal had the intention of paying for his grave sins in another way.